With the revenge of this young man came the end of winter. He stood and looked at the work of his hands, where everyone who tried to stop him from taking over the winter forest was destroyed. Spring should come very soon, when all the plants bloom, come to life, and everyone around begins to be overwhelmed with happiness. But this young man could not know whether this long-awaited spring would come to the winter forest. Tiffany loved literature where the plots were tied to revenge, where, among all the works that suited her taste, she liked the most, The Master of the Winter Forest. No matter what anyone told her, the girl was indescribably delighted with this work, which they read more than once. Sitting next to the sick boy, Tiffany reasoned that the ending, which left a feeling of emptiness, was truly ideal. The boy's voice distracted the girl from her thoughts about her favorite book and the feelings associated with it. Tiffany turned her head and looked at the boy's face, blazing with fever and fully conveying his general condition. The girl asked how the child was feeling now. But what Oliver replied was that his aunt should not worry about his health and calmly go for a walk at today's festival, thereby causing a smile on her face. The girl adjusted the compress on the boy's head and told him not to think about her, but rather to sleep a little more to gain strength. In her mind, Tiffany thought that the boy would be upset if she said that she really wanted to go to the festival. Looking at the falling asleep boy, the girl remembered that in the future this child would become the main character of the novel Master of the Winter Forest. While washing the clothes along the way, Tiffany again plunged into memories. Now she was in the role of a minor character in her favorite work, Oliver's aunt, Elizabeth Rowdy. Yes, Tiffany literally took over the body of this beautiful girl. About a month ago, in her world, she was returning from some party in a state of extreme intoxication, and, not following safety rules when crossing the road, she fell under a speeding car. When she woke up, Tiffany discovered that she was in another world in the body of this girl. She discovered that in addition to her own memories, this new body contained the memories of Elizabeth herself. But the main problem was that she found herself in a novel whose plot is filled with revenge, where there is no place for places or hopes. Once again, Tiffany returned to the memories of the contents of her favorite book, in the events of which she unexpectedly became a participant. Oliver, an illegitimate child who did not know his father and lost his mother early, lived with his aunt Elizabeth. One day, a man appeared on the threshold of their house, introducing himself as Oliver's uncle and telling him that the boy belonged to the ducal family of Richardson from the Winter Forest and took him with him. However, in the Winter Forest, only the embittered glances of his relatives awaited Oliver, who clearly did not want to share the benefits of the life of aristocrats with the child. The conspiracies and tricks of unfriendly relatives cost the boy dearly, where he lost his aunt and his direct line of kinship. He also lost his uncle, who protected the boy to the last drop of blood. When his own life was threatened, Oliver hid his identity and began living under a different name, waiting for the right moment for revenge. He grew up, became a war hero, and returned to the Winter Forest in order to punish everyone who plotted against him and killed his loved ones. Tiffany did not want to personally participate in the development of the plot of the novel, even though she found herself inside her favorite work. After all, she was the first character to suffer because she treated a boy badly. Elizabeth did not stand on ceremony at all in the matter of raising the boy and treating him. She raised her voice at him for any reason, called him a worthless creature, accused him of hanging on her neck, and sent him off to earn money. In the meantime, all the little boy could do was snap, saying that only the aunt herself was worthless here, and he had been earning his own bread for a long time. The girl who woke up in Elizabeth's body forced her brain to remember every detail. The worthless Elizabeth eventually sold Oliver to his uncle who came for him. Having received the money, she began to hang around the Duke because she could not curb her greedy nature, which Oliver's evil relatives took advantage of, which ultimately led to the end of this pathetic woman. Tiffany shuddered at the thought that she was in this world only to die again, which had already happened to her in her world. She was literally banging her head on the floor, thinking that she was now paying the price for her tastes in book genres. But her friend from that world often told her that she needed to relax and start reading something lighter and more enjoyable than books about revenge. But now it was too late to change anything, which, by the way, did not in the least cancel the girl's desire to live on, albeit within the novel. She remembered that Oliver went to the Winter Forest at the age of 10. The duchy recognized his existence, which means the girl could not and should not have prevented the boy from returning home. The body's memories told the girl that Oliver is now 9 years old, which means she has time to change, if not the entire story of the novel, then at least Elizabeth's fate. First of all, the girl decided to change the boy's perception of her aunt and used her most important trump card, the ability to cook well. Oliver earned his own food, receiving an apple or a piece of bread for carrying out various tasks for the residents. But this was barely enough to keep the child alive. Tiffany recalled all this with tears in her eyes because the child is only 9 years old and he must drink well. On that day of change, Tiffany was distracted from cooking and gloomy thoughts by the creaking of the door. It was Oliver who returned from his usual routine, hungry and exhausted. Tiffany greeted him with a good-natured face, a smile, and words that the boy was probably very hungry. After which, taking the pan in her hands, the girl said that she had prepared stew with vegetables and offered to eat together. But the boy, without any enthusiasm, noted that his aunt seemed to have gone crazy while he was away and suggested that she behave as usual. Tiffany decided that no other reaction was worth expecting, given the amount of time the boy lived with a tyrant in the person of his own aunt. Oliver's mother died about 5 years ago. At first, Elizabeth thought that the nephew she had taken under her wing would simply annoy her. But the situation changed as the boy grew older, where over time he began to literally blossom before our eyes. Since everyone in their family, including their deceased sister Elizabeth, had an outstanding appearance, Elizabeth, on the other hand, constantly felt complex because of her, in her opinion, inconspicuous appearance. And despite the fact that Elizabeth was actually very beautiful, the blossoming Oliver stirred up old feelings. She began to regularly take out all her anger on her nephew. All this explained why the boy closed himself off from the world, because he had to go through real hell with such and such an aunt. Tiffany understood that, of course, she could not improve her relationship with her nephew with the help of just preparing dinner, but she was firmly committed to doing this. She showed her good attitude towards him in everything. She invited him for a walk, cooked delicious food, came to the room in the morning, wishing him good morning. Sometimes her fruitless efforts, where the boy constantly tried to escape from her or somehow isolate himself, brought the girl to tears of despair. This was the month that Tiffany lived in the body of the minor heroine of her favorite novel, Winter Forest, where, remembering the events of the past month, the girl herself did not notice how she fell asleep from the fatigue that was falling on her more and more. Tiffany approached the boy's bed to check on his condition. She checked his temperature, thinking that only with the onset of illness did Oliver's attitude towards her begin to change. The girl noted with bitterness that since the child's body was sick, then the soul too was most likely already exhausted. In his sleep, the boy suddenly said the word mom, which also confirmed Tiffany's thoughts that Oliver was still a small child who needed his mother's love and care. She furiously scolded Elizabeth for being so callous towards the boy and accused her of inhumanity. The child's strong cough in his sleep added to the strong feelings of pity. Looking at the suffering boy with her eyes wet with tears, Tiffany told him to be patient a little longer while she went to get the medicine. Going out into the street and heading towards the forest, Tiffany thought about the fact that she had no money at all. However, she still had knowledge about various useful plants that she could collect, take, and sell to a healer, and with the proceeds buy medicine for Oliver. Quite quickly, her basket was filled with a variety of herbs. Assessing the volume collected, the girl figured that perhaps there would be money left over for groceries, and she and the boy will be able to eat well for some time. And if you try really hard and save money, you can even buy some toys for Oliver. After all, the boy has practically no good and warm memories and has never had toys. The girl mentally turned to the Almighty and asked him to allow the boy to find only happiness in the future. She was distracted from her prayer by a rapidly approaching sound that made her turn her head. But she didn't have time to notice anything. Something rushed past the girl like a hurricane, sweeping away everything in its path. Tiffany could only do that, already sitting on the ground next to an overturned basket of herbs, to follow the carriage disappearing in the distance, almost repeating the story of the girl in that other world. My first reflex was to rub my bruised head. And then Tiffany turned her attention to her dress, which was now damaged, and it was not clear whether it could be repaired. But there was no time to grieve about the dress and pay attention to the bruises, and the girl, picking up the basket and collecting the scattered herbs, continued on her way. Having reached the village, the girl immediately noticed that they were well prepared for today's festival. The only thing Tiffany was afraid of was meeting some of Elizabeth's former acquaintances. She was well aware that with her acting skills, she would not be able to portray the intolerable character of the character in whose body she found herself, so she decided to resolve her affairs as quickly as possible and return home. But before she had time to take even a couple of steps, she heard the name Elizabeth spoken by a man's voice. Turning around, the girl saw some hillbilly with an absolutely stupid look, smiling from ear to ear and asking her if she was looking for a man for tonight. At first, such a direct and fairly frank question took the girl by surprise. Looking at this uncouth lout, who could not understand why his former acquaintance was looking at him like that, Tiffany had only one association, that his head reminded her of nothing more than a potato. Deciding to simply ignore the words of this man she did not immediately like, Tiffany turned away, but he did not lag behind, saying that today a certain aristocrat whom no one knew appeared here. Immediately, the girl remembered that meeting with the carriage, which almost sent her completely to another world. After telling the man to leave her alone, Tiffany continued on her way to the healer. But the guy did not lag behind, again asking a tactless question about the fact that Elizabeth apparently had already spent time in the company of this aristocrat, which is why she looked so shabby. Tiffany was already starting to get very tired of this guy's close attention to Elizabeth's person, as well as his inappropriate questions. But the guy still didn't stop, asking this time if the girl had found someone to go to the festival with. Continuing on, Tiffany replied that she was not going to the festival because Oliver was sick and needed care. The words that all this was an invention completely infuriated the girl, and she, turning around sharply, very rudely told him to leave her alone, asking at the same time whether he needed to pester her so much that it got to the point of rudeness. Stunned by this behavior of his previously rather compliant acquaintance, the guy, stuttering, replied that no, it was not necessary. Finally calling the annoying character in her favorite novel a fairy tale idiot, Tiffany continued on her way. However, this character quickly came to his senses from such an attack from the girl, and, deciding to leave the last word for himself, said that she should not pretend to be touchy, and should lower the bar in order to get married. Tiffany couldn't ignore this and turned around and walked up to her even more unpleasant interlocutor. With a smile on her face, she said that, judging by his attempts to woo her, he had also set his bar too high, which should be lowered significantly lower in order to get married. The guy never expected such an answer from the girl and fell into a complete stupor. Unable to find a way to respond to such a statement, Tiffany's opponent hastily retreated, muttering something under his breath. Although she won the verbal battle, the girl, angry with the whole situation, also continued on her way, which did not last long, since in a fit of emotion, she did not notice how she had stumbled upon a random person she met. And again the girl was sitting on the ground, only now she was rubbing her nose, which had been bruised in the collision, and cursing at today's unfortunate day. Suddenly, an open palm appeared right in front of her, accompanied by a question whether the girl was okay. And the first thing she was delighted with was the stranger's voice, which she was very pleased to hear. The next thing she noticed was the shoes of her random stranger. They were very expensive shoes, which indicated the high position of their owner, but Tiffany did not need to meet such a person. And then the man dropped to one knee and apologized that in his haste he had shown tactlessness and inattention towards the beautiful lady. Trying not to look at him, Tiffany quickly stood up and said that nothing bad had happened because she was also in a hurry. And in response to the words of the person she met that her clothes were ruined and an attempt to look into her eyes, the girl, covering herself with her hand, replied that the man was not to blame for anything. Having finally said that she had a lot of urgent matters and she needed to go, Tiffany hastily left the place of the second unexpected meeting. And the man who encountered her remained standing right in the middle of the street, greatly surprised by the strange behavior of his random acquaintance. Soon the girl was already heading back home, where in her basket, instead of herbs, there were already medicines and some food. The voice of the red-haired girl asking what she had in her hands attracted Tiffany's attention. Turning around, she saw one of Elizabeth's friends named Lara. She replied that Oliver was ill, and she went to the healer for medicine, buying food for home along the way, which clearly shocked her interlocutor, who knew Elizabeth's character, who would never take care of the boy. However, this was not all that Lara could not understand because she asked what Elizabeth was doing here, which confused the latter. Seeing the girl's reaction, Lara explained that she recently wanted to flirt with some aristocrat, but he asked about Elizabeth's house and immediately left. Tiffany listened attentively, and Lara continued, saying that she naively believed that Elizabeth managed to lure this handsome man in military uniform to her. This information greatly puzzled Tiffany, who could not figure out what kind of man was looking for her house and why a military man. And then it dawned on her that Oliver's uncle should appear just during the spring festival, but this should happen when the boy turns 10 years old. And at that very moment, she understood everything that was happening. Abruptly taking off, she rushed towards her house, hastily saying goodbye to Lara, and she, in turn, shouted curses after her, accusing her of the fact that the man was more dear to her than her friend. Tiffany ran home as fast as she could, managing to simultaneously send curses to Elizabeth, who, as it turned out, did not even know the exact age of her nephew, giving Tiffany the memories that he was 9 years old. A man in a beautiful military uniform was indeed already standing near the front door, and the girl had no choice but to acknowledge the presence of that same man here. Oliver's father's brother, Thomas Richardson. His attractive appearance also became the subject of Tiffany's close attention, where she closely examined every detail of his uniform and every feature of this handsome face of a true aristocrat. And when Thomas, noticing the girl, approached, she joyfully noted that he was also tall. The first thing the man said were words of joy at their re-meeting, which made the girl feel confused as she couldn't remember her or Elizabeth ever meeting this man. But Thomas quickly dispelled this embarrassment by recalling the confrontation on the street that occurred less than an hour ago, making the girl surprised and embarrassed even more. Then, with ceremony, the man introduced himself, calling himself Colonel Thomas Richardson of the Royal Army, and asking if the girl was the mistress of the house. Answering positively, Tiffany asked what brought the man to this house, to which the man asked if the girl knew a man named George Richardson. Of course, this man was familiar to Tiffany from the novel, because this is the name of Oliver's father, but he could not be familiar to Elizabeth. Therefore, the girl replied that she did not understand who the man was talking about and that he was probably just in the wrong house. With disappointment, Thomas concluded that if it wasn't the rowdies living in this house, then he had really made a mistake. Knowing very well the plot of the book and how this man knows how to stand his ground, the girl confirmed that her last name was indeed Rowdy, after which she politely suggested continuing the conversation inside the house. As they walked inside, Tiffany quickly replayed the events of the novel in her head, once again remembering that the man following her was Thomas Richardson. On the first day of the May festival, he arrived in this village in order to take his nephew to the winter forest. Arriving at the house, he found Oliver there, sick and completely alone, because his Aunt Elizabeth had fun at the festival until the early hours of the night. This sent the Colonel into a frenzy where he accused Elizabeth of being completely irresponsible and said he was taking Oliver away. Elizabeth, in response, said that the man did not dare to accuse her of anything because they left an illegitimate child on her neck and she experienced a lot of suffering with him, where, instead of enjoying her youth, she wastes her days as a single mother, and therefore a man does not dare to just come and declare that he will take the boy. In order for his actions to be correct, he must compensate her for the suffering she endured. The man complied with Elizabeth's demand and paid for all the time that Oliver spent with her. At the same time, he stated that the second the girl takes the money, she will lose the right to interfere in the life of his nephew. As a result, Elizabeth was happy with the deal, but the boy suffered severe mental trauma because his hopes for his aunt were not justified. Tiffany decided that this would not happen again, now that she was in the role of Elizabeth, and out loud apologized to the man for the wait. To which Thomas replied that there was no need to worry, since everything was fine. The girl prepared herbal tea, the taste of which the Colonel really liked, which he remarked out loud. Tiffany drew up a plan for the conversation, where she should not disclose the information she knew about the events of the book and should not create in the man the opinion that she wanted to get rid of the boy. She began the conversation with the fact that she was really hearing the name George for the first time, and her Rowdy family was from a remote area and had nothing to do with the Richardson family. To which Thomas asked if she had written a letter to George about 5 years ago, informing him that he had an illegitimate son. Mentally concluding that Sister Elizabeth had managed to write the letter before her death, Tiffany voiced out loud the question that whether it was too late for the man to decide to respond to the letter 5 years ago. Thomas explained that he was just George's younger half-brother, and their family knew nothing about the child because his brother hid it from everyone. When George died, while sorting out his things, he came across a letter informing him of the presence of his son. However, there was no more information there, except for Rowdy's last name, which was the reason for such a long time spent on the search, for which he also apologized to the girl. Tiffany was sympathetic to the situation, saying that there was no need to apologize, since Thomas was not the creator of this story. And when asked where the child was, the girl, pointing to the stairs, said that she was sleeping at the top. This was followed by a logical question about the boy's name, which was no secret, and Tiffany said that his name was Oliver. Looking at the man, the girl recalled the events of the book, where Oliver was delighted with his uncle Thomas, who took care of him in a fatherly way, acted as a mentor, and also, according to Tiffany's personal observation, was very handsome. After some thought, Thomas asked who Oliver's girlfriend was, promptly receiving the answer that she was his aunt. Then the man asked the next logical question regarding the whereabouts of the boy's mother. Tiffany sadly reported that his mother died of an infectious disease 5 years ago. During this conversation, Thomas received answers to all his questions and, in the end, putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, apologized for the irresponsible behavior of his older brother who abandoned the child. The girl, having accepted the apology, noted that in every family there are unworthy people. Mentally thinking that in the Rowdy family, Elizabeth was such a person until she, Tiffany, ended up in her body. The Colonel continued, saying that George never married, and Oliver was his only child, whose existence George's parents now know about, looking forward to meeting their grandson. The girl knew very well what was about to be discussed, and simply waited patiently for the culmination of this speech. And it was not long in coming, where the Colonel said that he was very ashamed to ask for such a thing, given that Elizabeth raised the child alone, but still he would dare to ask to take the boy with him. Tiffany mentally calmed herself down by reminding herself that she should not know the events of the future, but was simply being a caring aunt. After all, a man should not decide that she wants to get rid of her nephew. That's why she said that Thomas's request was very unexpected for her. To which the boy's uncle assured the girl that he perfectly understood her concern and could promise that in the winter forest he would create the best living conditions for him. The girl, playing the role she had intended, said that she had no reason to doubt the man's words, but now it was difficult for her to give him an answer to the question, where, moreover, there was a need to somehow inform the boy himself about this. Thomas began to apologize for creating such a burdensome situation for Elizabeth with his appearance and request. But Tiffany replied that she did not feel any inconvenience, and that it would be good for the man to meet with Oliver himself, for example, tomorrow, since the boy was feeling very bad today. The Colonel considered this proposal more than reasonable and agreed with the girl to first discuss everything with the boy himself. Soon, he was already standing on the steps of his carriage, saying that he would return tomorrow, and listening to Elizabeth's response, wish for a good journey. A few seconds later, the carriage sped off, leaving the girl alone on the street. Returning to the house, the girl sat straight on the floor, leaning against the wall, and noted that events were developing faster than expected. But if Oliver considered her a good aunt at the time of his departure to the winter forest, then she would probably be able to avoid revenge in your address. The day was over, the last rays of the sun had long disappeared behind the horizon, and night was slowly falling on the village. Over dinner, Tiffany continued to hover in her thoughts about her future, which, no less, posed the question of her own survival. She looked at the revived boy, who was eating the dinner she had prepared with appetite and pleasure. The thought of whether it is even worth sending this child along such a thorny and difficult path as is prescribed for him in the pages of the book. She hasn't even told Oliver yet about the visit of his Uncle Thomas, who wants to take the boy to the winter forest. But today, on this last evening together, the girl just wanted to enjoy the company of this boy, to whom she had become so attached over the past month. She, of course, would really like this nice boy to stay with her, but at the same time she understood that she could not give anything to this baby. And the Richardsons will never give up Oliver, whether she has to fight the whole dukedom. Moreover, she surrounded him with care and love only a month ago, where before that, for 5 years, Oliver was under the yoke of his aunt. Meanwhile, the boy noticed the strange state and behavior of his aunt, and asked why she hardly eats at all. To which Tiffany pulled herself together and replied as lightheartedly as possible that everything was fine and the boy had nothing to worry about. Remembering again that today was their last evening together, the girl carefully patted the boy's cheek with words of tenderness, causing a corresponding reaction from Oliver in the form of words that he was no longer little. The next day, Thomas Richardson, as promised, again arrived at Rowdy's house, where he stood and looked at the little red-haired boy. And Oliver stood and carefully examined the unknown man in military uniform. Tiffany, playing the role she had created for herself, told Oliver that this was his uncle. However, the boy's reaction was not what the girl expected, where the boy simply remained silent and did not even say hello. And to his aunt's call to be polite, Oliver replied that he and this guy didn't even look alike and couldn't be related to each other. Mentally understanding that the boy was right, Tiffany voiced that they were not at all similar to her, but at the same time they were relatives to each other. But the boy was adamant and literally shouted that he and his aunt were related. This is a completely different question. Tiffany was surprised that everything did not go as it was described in the novel, and Thomas, meanwhile, tried to explain to the boy that his father, whom Oliver resembles, is Thomas's brother, where Thomas himself took the features of his father, and his brother took the features of his mother, which made them completely different from each other. Oliver listened to all this with great disbelief and said nothing in response. Then, in order to completely dispel the boy's doubts, the colonel took out of his pocket a medallion containing a portrait of his brother and showed it to Oliver. The first to silently admire the beauty of Oliver's father was Tiffany, who did not find anything surprising in the fact that her sister Elizabeth was fascinated by this man. And Oliver himself looked sadly at the portrait of his father, recognizing his features in himself. When the boy finished looking at the portrait, Tiffany said that his uncle was from a very wealthy aristocratic family, and if the boy goes with him, he will be able to eat good meat every day and learn a lot. After these words, the boy asked about the fate of his aunt herself, to which Tiffany replied that she would stay to live here, in this village. She was very pleased that the boy still considered her his relative, and they parted on such a wonderful note. Oliver cast a sly glance towards the man standing nearby, and suddenly shouting the word "Mom," he rushed into the arms of his Aunt Elizabeth, which shocked Tiffany twice, both with his hugs and by calling her mom, which was completely unexpected for the girl. With tears in his eyes, he asked his mother not to leave him and promised to continue to call her aunt. Here, the colonel intervened in this scene, carefully noting his memory that the girl introduced herself to him as the boy's aunt. To which Tiffany once again confirmed that she really was just an aunt to Oliver. But the boy continued his performance, snuggling into Tiffany and over again shouting the word "Mom" and requests not to leave him. And the colonel, continuing to observe what was happening, expressed complete misunderstanding regarding this scene. But, a second later, Thomas made a statement that if Miss really was Oliver's mother, then he could not afford to take him away, so as not to break the maternal connection. And his next words, that the girl, in this case, needed to go to the winter forest with them, rang like thunder in the girl's ears. She understood perfectly well that her own life was at stake because staying in the winter forest promised her death, and therefore she voiced that a measured and quiet life in this village was more suitable for her. At this point, Oliver intervened, reminding Elizabeth of her own words that she had always dreamed of living in a palace like a princess, where her fingers would be decorated with gold rings with precious stones, and veal steak would be served for lunch every day. To which Tiffany, in contrast to Oliver's arguments, replied that she had always been and remains a supporter of a modest life, and she was used to eating simple and low-fat foods. Then she sat down and said in all seriousness that everyone has an inherent desire to live in abundance, but she spent her whole life in this village, where she has many friends and she does not want to move to another place. Then the boy continued to play his role, roaring and making a statement that by giving him to this suspicious guy, the girl was trying to get rid of him so that she could later get married. Where the words relating to the colonel's personality about his suspicion surprised the man a lot. Reinforcing what was said, the boy gave Thomas an extremely incredulous look. But having gathered himself, Thomas announced that if Miss plans to get married, then the best option would be to find herself a husband in the winter forest. Oliver was quick to support what was said, saying that the man's proposed option was excellent and suitable for both the aunt and the boy. Now tears began to well up in the eyes of Tiffany, who, trying to avoid a fatal trip for her, said that she would definitely be out of place there, and they might begin to oppress her. After all, she is just the younger sister of a girl who gave birth to a child from their deceased son. But the boy turned it around and said that the situation is completely different from how Elizabeth sees it, because she is the one who raised this child when one parent hid his existence and the other died. Such intelligence of the boy led the girl into a stupor, and she simply did not know what to say. Thomas interrupted the awkward pause, saying that the Richardson family could well afford to shelter and take care of one more person. He said that it is possible to make any girl's desire come true, be it a simple measured life or the life of a princess in a palace. And he ended his slightly pretentious speech by saying that absolutely everything is possible in the winter forest. Tiffany was struck on the spot by such a speech, after which she had no more arguments left. The carriage was already standing ready for the journey, and Tiffany still couldn't believe that she was starting a journey into the winter forest, where, according to the plot of the book, Elizabeth faces inevitable death. The girl packed her few luggage quite quickly. Suddenly, a familiar female voice sounded behind her, shouting Elizabeth's name. Turning around, the girl saw Lara running up to her, who asked if the rumor that Elizabeth was going to live with aristocrats and would now be a rich lady was really true. Running closer, Lara stated that everything happened exactly as Elizabeth had always said, that sooner or later she would marry an aristocrat. Having heard such things, Tiffany was very scared that Thomas, with whom she had a completely different relationship than Lara imagined, might hear this. Meanwhile, the colonel announced that all preparations were completed and they could set out. He approached the girls and, in front of the astonished Lara, invited Elizabeth to get into the carriage, calling her Miss Rowdy. And Lara mentally concluded that somewhere she definitely did something wrong, and from today on she needs to dream big, like Elizabeth. And after the leaving girl, she shouted that her groom would be no worse than Elizabeth's groom, and she too would sooner or later join aristocratic society. Tiffany could do nothing but blush, and Thomas added fuel to the fire by asking what kind of problem arose with Miss Rowdy's friend. Quickly saying that there were no problems, the girl literally jumped into the carriage, and only then did it dawn on her that Thomas offered her his hand in order to climb into the carriage, which she simply ignored. While she was worried about this, and the colonel was looking at his hand, Oliver began to hurry the man, asking what the uncle was doing there and stating that it was time for them to go. Tiffany reacted emotionally to this boy's remark, saying that he should call Thomas not uncle but uncle. According to the events of the book, Oliver was very thirsty for love and tried to show his best side to all his relatives in the winter forest. Now Tiffany noted that the boy was showing up in a completely different way, which meant he should be educated. In a calmer tone, the girl told the boy that he shouldn't address his uncle like that. But the boy simply ignored what was said, looking out the window of the carriage starting its journey. And so the gates of this village were left behind. Tiffany sat in the carriage and thought that after so many trials that had befallen her, she was leaving this village. Suddenly, a familiar male silhouette appeared in the window. The girl said nothing to the man with the potato head. She only thought that he had no business staring at her like that. Of course, the future worried the girl greatly, but there was no going back. Her fight for survival in this revenge-driven plot has only just begun. Traveling in a carriage was not easy for the girl. Every now and then the carriage would bounce on the rocks, and the girl would also feel very sick. Tiffany was amazed at how easily Thomas managed to remain so calm. She was distracted from her thoughts about the discomfort of the journey by the colonel's voice asking if Elizabeth was really Oliver's mother. To which the girl replied, not without emotion, that of course not, since in that case she would have to give birth to him at the age of 16 because now she is only 27, and the man's brother would then become a real libertine. The harshness of the girl's answer slightly discouraged the colonel, who had long been accustomed to high manners among people, but he said that this was exactly what could be expected from his brother, because he had once been seen on a secret date with a lady who was older than their mother. Hearing this, Tiffany remembered that the book actually wrote about this and softened her tone a little, saying that they could simply return to the village and any resident would confirm to the colonel that she was only the boy's aunt. But Thomas assured the girl that this was not necessary, because he could say with complete confidence that Mrs. Rowdy was not lying. Tiffany breathed a sigh of relief. She tried to explain that Oliver was not a liar, but the man stopped her, saying that he already knew and understood everything. It's obvious that the child simply did not want to part with his aunt, who took care of him so well and for a long time. Thomas then said that he now fully understands why Oliver is so attached to the girl. where you can see with the naked eye that she cares about him as if he really were her own son. On the one hand, the girl was very pleased to hear such words. On the other hand, she again mentally noted that such care only takes place for a month. Thomas resolutely declared that he would follow Elizabeth's example and would consider Oliver his own son, and together they could become real parents for him. Tiffany couldn't understand what this wonderful man was even saying. In response, she said that the colonel should choose his words more carefully, otherwise he might be misunderstood, to which Thomas reacted with incomprehension. The girl tried to explain that she understood Thomas's intentions to take care of Oliver, but if such words were said to a stranger, problems could arise because they would regard these words as a marriage proposal. At first, the colonel was simply silent, apparently digesting what he heard, and then voiced that he had no reason to say such words to anyone else, since Oliver considered only Elizabeth his mother. Tiffany, confused, came to the conclusion that Thomas did not understand at all what she was trying to tell him. And then the girl noticed that if the real Elizabeth were here, the man would long ago have been tied hand and foot with his words. However, soon the attention of the interlocutors was attracted by the changed appearance in the carriage window, where a big city appeared before them, and the colonel announced that here they would take the train, but before it departed, they needed to go shopping. Tiffany remembered that it was in this city that Oliver's transformation should take place. This was her favorite passage of the book, where she believed that such a beautiful child would suit any clothes. And Tiffany herself, apparently, also expected a transformation, which gave the girl a pleasant feeling. In yet another dress, she appeared before the eyes of her fellow travelers, where Thomas noted that this dress fits quite well, and Oliver said that any full skirt would fit much better. The girl's patience was coming to an end, and she, pointing to the mountain of clothes that she had already tried on, said that she should stop there and choose something. The word choose did not really inspire Thomas, and he said that there was no question of any choice, since all the outfits would be bought. This shocked the girl, even in her own world, who was completely unaccustomed to the fact that you can buy half the store at one time. And the colonel had already called the store manager and gave orders to pack all the dresses, including what Elizabeth was currently wearing. Talking to himself, Thomas noticed that, unfortunately, now they can only buy ready-made dresses, and even if they give them to the atelier, they will be very different from those made to order. Here, Oliver inserted his comment, saying that his aunt needed to choose a black outfit that would highlight her elegance. Well, Thomas, without hesitation, invited the girl to try on a number of more dresses. The girl was in some kind of mixed state, where on the one hand she really liked the fact that she could choose so many outfits, but on the other hand she didn't like the fact that no one listened to her opinion. But now the store workers were helping Tiffany try on another dark-colored dress. After some time, the fitting was completed and the absolutely exhausted girl, leaving the store, asked the man for forgiveness, calling him a colonel, saying that she had no more strength left. Thomas felt that the colonel's address was too formal for a family member. Not knowing how to behave correctly and how to address a man, Tiffany offered him the word master. But this did not suit the colonel, who said that Elizabeth could address him simply as Thomas. This was extremely unexpected for the girl, but at the same time it was pleasant that she was given permission to communicate so closely with a man. But only having finished with these formalities, Thomas turned sharply and headed towards another store, saying that he still needed to buy a lot for Mrs. Rhodey, and then start buying the necessary things for Oliver. This statement shocked the girl, and she voiced her thoughts that she believed that everything she needed had already been purchased and nothing else was needed. The girl's words confused the man, and he reacted by asking how Miss Rowdy was going to manage without shoes and hats. Tiffany retorted this attack, noting that the hats had already been purchased since they were included with the dresses, to which Thomas replied that in a specialized boutique there would be better options than those included in the set. To which the girl could only utter words, indicating that she doubted the seriousness of the man's intentions. Thomas, after a pause, asked the girl why it was so unpleasant for her to receive gifts from him, which took Tiffany by surprise. She immediately began to convince the man that it was not a matter of hostility at all. And Thomas immediately continued the pressure, saying that in this case the issue with further purchases can be considered resolved, to which the girl hesitantly said that the man had already done too much for her. Realizing why the girl was tormented by doubts, Thomas told her not to worry, since for him all this was a mere trifle. Tiffany couldn't find an answer to this. And then Thomas, turning around again, continued towards the boutique, inviting Elizabeth to follow him. Looking at the man leaving, Tiffany noted that she had just witnessed the typical self-centered behavior of an aristocrat. In the book, the narration is told on behalf of Oliver, and the character of Thomas is described from the perspective of a boy, and therefore now it was difficult for the girl to perceive any of his new features. The shopping and boutique trips were over, and everything purchased was a real mountain of boxes. But the colonel was not at all impressed by this spectacle, where he noted that since they were not in the capital, there was practically nothing to choose from, but he hoped that this would be enough for the girl at first. Looking at his watch, Thomas said that now it was time to go choose things for Oliver, which again shocked his companions. And now they were already in the store, where Oliver tried on one suit after another, and Tiffany could not get enough of the fact that she could personally participate in her favorite scene of the novel. The girl wanted the boy to try on literally everything that was in the store. She pointed first in one direction and then in the other, assuring that dark green would suit the boy and asking how he liked this or that fabric from which the clothes were made. But the boy answered without any enthusiasm that he would choose his own clothes. After which Oliver turned to the store staff with a request to show him a gray jacket. But the restless Tiffany stopped him, saying that she would now help him with a normal choice. And at the same moment, she ran up to the suit with a red vest embroidered with gold, offering to try on this overly pretentious outfit, which to her, a girl, seemed very beautiful. However, the boy clearly did not share this choice, nor did the colonel, who coughed politely somewhere in the background. Trying to somehow find expressions, Oliver said that this outfit was very bold, but it was unlikely that he would be comfortable in it. Thomas also contributed, calling Elizabeth's choice original. The definition used by the man completely satisfied the boy, and he, delighted, said that indeed, this suit was too original, while he preferred a more classic style. Tiffany wondered why her taste turned out to be so strange, and whether this was the reason why she was not allowed to choose her own dresses. Meanwhile, Oliver himself chose a suit, which the store employees already helped him put on. The day came to an end, and having purchased everything they needed, the travelers headed to the hotel. There, the colonel announced that they would continue their journey tomorrow and would spend the night in this hotel. Thomas wished Mrs. Rowdy a good rest, who was still worried about not seeing Oliver in the clothes she wanted. For tired travelers, the night passed quite quickly, and it was replaced by a new warm spring day. Thomas, Tiffany, and Oliver had already reached the station and were waiting to board the train. The colonel's attention was attracted by a male voice calling him master. It was one of the train conductors who said that their carriage was ready to receive passengers. And indeed, even from the presence of the coat of arms on the carriage, one could guess that it belonged to the Rogers family. This greatly impressed the girl, who had not even heard wishes from the guide for a good journey. Once inside, Tiffany noted that she was not in a compartment, but in the real royal chambers. Oliver sat silently for now, looking around. Tiffany recalled the events of the book, where the boy, even before landing, expressed surprise at how such a huge thing made of metal moved without horses. And before he was inside, the boy immediately began asking Thomas for permission to inspect the carriage. Now Oliver's reaction was completely different. Although both in the book and now, the boy saw the train for the first time. The girl suggested that the boy could not restrain his emotions in the presence of Thomas. Deciding to push things closer to the plot of the novel, Tiffany asked Oliver if he would like to tour the train. The boy thought for a while. But very soon he said that he wanted to take a walk and would return soon. Thomas kindly showed Oliver which way the driver's cabin was, which might be busy because the train had already started moving. But the boy said that he was not going to bother the drivers, but would simply look around and return. Tiffany tried to explain to the man that the boy was acting this way not because he didn't like Thomas, to which the colonel remarked that he even found his behavior cute. And in general, the boy behaved quite decently, but his brother at that age behaved much worse. Thomas then invited Miss Rhodey to tour the train, where he would act as her personal tour guide, to which Tiffany refused, citing fatigue from the day before. And only now the girl realized that the man still calls her Mrs. Rowdy, whereas he himself long ago allowed people to call him simply by his name. Without hesitation, Tiffany told Thomas that he could also call her by her first name, since she was very uncomfortable that only she was called by her first name. The man was very surprised and even asked if the girl really gave him such permission, to which the girl once again confirmed that the man can now address her by name. Words of gratitude from the man were not long in coming, where he called the girl Miss Elizabeth, thereby giving her great pleasure. Thomas then noted that he was even a little excited now because he and the girl were gradually getting closer, which literally made Elizabeth blush, where she mentally concluded that she could not deny that she too was very excited by such a rapprochement. But then she came to the thought that no matter how handsome this man was, she could not get close to him. There were no female characters involved in Thomas or romantic relationships in the novel, which suggested a negative male attitude towards marriage. Although the novel did not mention the reasons for his disinterest in marriage, all these thoughts made the girl think hard about the events of her favorite book. She recalled how he suggested calling him by his name, and again came to the conclusion that now he was very different from the person who was described on the pages of the novel. Then the suspicion crept into the girl's bright head that maybe Thomas was trying to get something from her, which was immediately refuted by the fact that the colonel would have immediately said what he needed, and did not beat around the bush. The girl's thoughts were interrupted by Oliver's return. The boy was in some kind of depressed mood. Tiffany was keenly interested in what happened to Oliver, to which the boy replied that everything was fine and returned to his place. The upset girl came to the logical conclusion that the boy still does not trust her, which means there is no proper rapprochement. She immediately remembered the entire past month, spent in this world caring for a boy where there are no washing machines. Cleaning the house has to be done without using a vacuum cleaner. And in order to cook food, you must first try to light the fire instead of turning on the stove. Now life was ahead in the winter forest, in another world where maids do all the work for the aristocrats. This is an ideal life option if you do not take into account the fact that she could die at any moment. Of course, the girl tried to think positively, but it was not easy. However, Tiffany firmly decided that she had to somehow try to pull herself together. After all, the novel is about revenge, and the dark streak began just during the journey to the winter forest. The first attempt was made on the train in which they are traveling now. Oliver then enters this seemingly better life in the dukedom, but the happiness does not last long, and Thomas comes to his defense. He sends the boy away from this evil place to save his life. The colonel himself dies in a battle with those who tried to pursue Oliver. Returning to the attack on the train, Thomas, of course, instantly neutralized the attacker, and the customer, according to Tiffany, was immediately obvious. It was the main villain of the novel, a certain Daniel Morris, who was Thomas's brother. But since the killer sent on the train died in the battle, no evidence of this connection could be found. And then the girl realized that if she tried to save the attacker's life, it could affect a lot in the future. Then she noticed how Thomas was reading the newspaper, and she immediately looked at Oliver, who was busy with a similar task. With a smile, she noted to herself that at least when reading, these two were similar and did not conflict. Tiffany asked the boy if he enjoyed reading the newspaper, to which Oliver dryly replied that he was just reading without unnecessary emotions. Noting the boy's adult-like behavior, Tiffany wondered why she didn't know he could read. And the next question was a misunderstanding why the boy didn't tell her about this skill right away, which she voiced out loud. At first, the aunt's question took the boy by surprise, but he was quickly found, having said that he just knows the letters and puts them into words. According to the events of the book, Oliver had to learn reading and writing while already in the winter forest. Tiffany asked the boy to read aloud to evaluate his reading ability, but Oliver simply twirled the newspaper in his hands, which aroused Tiffany's indignation, so she understood that he was deliberately delaying. And suddenly he actually started reading, where it was about the truth of George Richardson's death. This more than greatly puzzled Tiffany, who was in no way prepared for the fact that such a sensitive topic regarding the boy's father would be touched upon in the newspaper. She asked the boy to stop doing nonsense and read normally, to which he replied that it really was written like that. The girl, still not believing that such gossip could be written in newspapers, asked Oliver for the publication. But as she delved deeper into her reading, Tiffany became convinced that the newspaper contained not only what he managed to voice, but also many other gossips about the Richardson family, including about Colonel Thomas himself, whose noble origins the newspapermen questioned. The contents of the paper greatly angered the girl, who began to lament that a child should not read such things and wonder what this newspaper was doing in their compartment. Thomas explained that the reputation of this publication is indeed very dubious. However, many aristocrats read the newspaper and therefore are forced to purchase it and offer it for reading in those places where high society frequents. But Tiffany could not be stopped. She continued to swear, calling the newspaper a disgusting source of information that a child should not see. Apologizing, Thomas said that he did not see anything wrong in the newspaper because everyone read it and promised that this would not happen again. Meanwhile, Tiffany pulled out a book with children's fairy tales from somewhere and handed it to the boy, saying that a child should read such literature. The reading given did not at all impress Oliver's precocious nature, where Tiffany almost guessed his thoughts that this book was not at all interesting to him. Realizing that the boy could only pretend to read, the girl promised to test him on his knowledge of the events of the book, to which Oliver said that he would read the book. Well, the newspaper that Tiffany took from the boy lay crumpled next to the girl, where she could not deny to herself that she would be interested in finishing reading the gossip that was written in it. And now the girl's hand imperceptibly reached out to the printed publication, where, a moment later, Tiffany was already enthusiastically reading that the dreams of the Duchess of the Winter Forest were not destined to come true. Earl George was the eldest son of the Richardson family. He was popular with women, and everyone dreamed of marrying him, but he died in an accident. The new heir to the family was his younger brother Thomas, who was not an ideal candidate. Tiffany remembered that the stumbling block was the contract for the construction of the railway with the royal family. In this world, the construction of railways began quite recently. The royal family awarded very few contracts for railway construction. The fight for the contract was very fierce, but one family still managed to win this Cold War. The winner was Duke Richardson House in Winterwood, where the house was represented at auction by the current Duke, Lord Julian Richardson. He acquired the right to build railways on the condition of his marriage to Princess Mary. Another condition of the contract was that the heir to the Winterwood Duchy must be a blood relative of the royal family. However, Princess Mary died giving birth to her son George, after which Evelyn, the princess's former maid of honor, became the wife of Lord Julian and gave birth to Thomas, where the latter is not related by blood to the royal family. Consequently, Oliver is the only and last rightful heir to the Duchy of Winterwood. Will the old Duke be happy about this? Will Thomas marry a representative of the royal family? Such questions swirled in the girl's head. She recalled that the second princess was quite close in her relationship with Thomas, even though he was always disappearing in the capital. Continuing to read the newspaper, Tiffany concluded that the plot of the article was very, very exciting. But suddenly, the newspaper was torn out of the girl's hands with a rather quick and deft movement. It was Oliver who reproached his aunt for reading herself what she had forbidden the boy to read. Tiffany had no choice but to say that she was an adult, and she was not forbidden to read such things. But the boy, without listening to her, rushed away, taking the newspaper with him. And the girl, to no avail, continued to tell the boy to come back and give her the newspaper that she needed for her own investigation. Hearing the word investigation, Thomas was distracted from reading and began to be keenly interested in what kind of investigation the girl was conducting and what kind of information she needed. Embarrassed by her own carelessness and expression, Tiffany said that she just wanted to know how things were in the winter forest. To which the man stated that such newspapers only write rumors that are not based on facts and cannot be trusted. And if a girl really wants to know something, then it's best for her to ask him. When asked by Tiffany about the frankness of her answers, Thomas assured the girl that he would be absolutely honest with her. Delighted, Tiffany asked the most important question that interested her regarding what stage the consideration of the issue of Thomas's marriage to the princess was at. The colonel clearly did not expect such a direct question and was greatly embarrassed when he heard it. The girl, of course, also felt uneasy about her question, especially when she saw the man's reaction. To the man's counter-question about whether this was really being discussed in the newspaper, Tiffany answered positively. After collecting himself a little, Thomas replied that this information was not true at all and was being disseminated by an unreliable source. But the girl did not let up, saying that the man had to get married because of the contract for the construction of railways, to which the man also answered negatively, citing the fact that he now has Oliver. The girl continued to insist on her opinion and argued that Thomas's marriage to the princess would save him from unnecessary rumors. According to information from the newspaper, the current duke is already quite old, and even changing the duchess will not help him have new offspring. And his son Thomas does not intend to marry and inherit the ducal title. Therefore, when Thomas publicly refuses the marriage, the old duke will need to find another candidate for the wedding with the princess, where the closest unmarried man and the first candidate is Daniel Morris. Where Daniel will say that since Thomas refuses to marry and George died, then the title of Duke of the Winter Garden should pass to him, to Daniel, where many pinned their hopes on such an outcome. But everything changed when Oliver arrived in the Winter Garden. This boy was a direct obstacle for Daniel to take over the title of Duke. If Thomas deviates from his plans and gets married, then the entire royal family will become Daniel's enemy. He cannot go against the king, which means the villain will try to get what he wants before something changes not in his favor. After all these thoughts, the girl raised her eyes and looked at Thomas. And the man wondered whether Elizabeth really wanted him to become related to the royal family. He said out loud that the next king, from the face of today's prince, would most likely want his sister's son to acquire the title of Duke. And Tiffany, recalling the events of the book, sadly concluded that there was no guarantee that Oliver would be happy about this. And then she noticed that they were heading to the Winter Forest, not for the sake of the title, but to meet their relatives. Thomas silently listened to what the girl was saying. But her last words could not help but amaze the man, which was noticeable from his face. Tiffany noted to herself that the colonel's embarrassed face looked very charming. But it didn't matter to her whether Oliver became the next duke. The main thing was that he could grow up in a calm environment. And Thomas suddenly said that Lady Elizabeth is a good aunt, and it is unlikely that he will be able to do as much for the boy as she did. Tiffany accepted the gratitude with embarrassment as she remembered that the colonel sacrificed his life for this boy. She said out loud that Mr. Thomas would be a wonderful uncle to the boy, which couldn't help but touch the man, and he expressed his gratitude for the girl's opinion of him. After these words, there came that same awkward pause where people don't know what to say or do now. At that very moment, they were caught by Oliver returning. He suddenly shouted with all his might for the man and woman to stop this pointless discussion, since he himself is able to decide who his uncle will be and his opinion on this matter comes first. Tiffany began to encourage the boy to be polite. But Oliver could not calm down and directly accused Thomas of flirting with his aunt, which greatly embarrassed the man. The girl tried to somehow defuse the situation, saying that there was no talk of any flirting. But the boy stubbornly stood his ground, telling the girl that she was lying. Since he heard perfectly well that their conversation concerned the wedding, and isn't this an indicator of their beginning intimacy? Tiffany was pretty tired of these claims, based on an incorrectly overheard conversation, and she literally knocked the boy on the head, saying that, firstly, eavesdropping is not good, and secondly, it's none of his business who is going to marry whom. Already very heated from the emotions that overwhelmed her, the girl said that Oliver should be glad that his aunt was doing well and not make complaints. And in general, he and Mr. Thomas talked about him, about Oliver, and not about each other. Looking at his aunt's reaction, the boy began to realize that somewhere he had made a mistake in his conclusions and said something under his breath, like an apology. And Tiffany, fully playing the role of a strict aunt, turned the conversation in a different direction and asked if the boy had finished reading the book, to which he had nothing to answer because the book had not been finished. Then the girl invited Oliver to sit down and read the book aloud to her. No matter how much the boy wanted it, he still had to take the book and sit down. With a not very happy face, Oliver opened the book and began to read the fairy tale. The way Elizabeth's nephew could read well impressed Tiffany. The girl found the only explanation for the boy's reading skills to be that he is the main character of this novel, which means he should be able to do everything well. Before Oliver could finish reading one book, Tiffany had already taken out the next one. She was indescribably delighted with how this boy read. Thomas simply silently watched this scene, but he soon returned to reading his newspaper, from which he was distracted by Miss Elizabeth's claims that it should not fall into the hands of children. After the second book, the third book was not slow to appear through the efforts of the good aunt. Oliver had no choice but to pick up and start reading the third book. A bright full moon illuminated the movement of the train, carrying Tiffany and her companions to a new life. The girl did not feel very well and sat with her hands folded on her stomach. Oliver doesn't know how he can help his aunt and was just trying to find out from her what she could eat. But the girl could not remember what and when she ate. She thought that expensive food was completely useless since it made her stomach hurt so much. Simple food had never caused this to happen. In addition, her thoughts were occupied by the impending assassination attempt, where she did not know exactly when this should happen, because the novel did not indicate the exact time, but only said that during one of the meals. Tiffany knew she had to be on her guard whenever she ate food, and the boy, continuing to worry about his aunt's health, asked if she had taken any medicine. The girl thanked Oliver for his care and said that she did not need medicine because everything would be fine if she massaged the right points on her palms. The child expressed doubts about this method of treatment, which he had never heard of, but the girl assured him that the method was extremely effective. Then Thomas arrived, who took the girl's hand in his and said that she needed to press a little on a different point. Having placed his finger at the desired point, the man pressed. At that same moment, hellish pain pierced the girl's body. Crying out in pain, Tiffany abruptly pulled her hand out of the man's hands. Thomas, very surprised by the girl's reaction, apologized and assumed that he could have accidentally pressed on the wrong point. Tiffany said that the point is correct. It just doesn't hurt when there are no stomach problems. The man noted Miss Elizabeth's extensive knowledge of medicine, but the girl, laughing, replied that in fact she knew almost nothing. To herself, she thought that she almost couldn't feel her hand after Thomas's pressure. Seeing that something was clearly wrong, the man once again inquired about the girl's condition. Tiffany decided that there was no point in scaring the man away and that she should ask him to continue massaging his palm. Only she turned to Thomas, talking about how much her arms had weakened. At that same moment, Oliver jumped out between her and the man, shouting that he himself would help his aunt. The boy told Thomas that he could be free. Tiffany was very pleased with how the boy took care of his aunt. But the boy's hands were too weak to give a good massage to his hand. Very carefully, the girl attracted the boy's attention, saying that she was grateful for the help, but he did not have enough strength. The boy, of course, was indignant even at such a cautious statement. Then the girl had no choice but to pretend to be in a faint state, and Oliver had no choice but to give way to a stronger man. Thomas walked up to Tiffany and sat down next to her. Taking the girl's hand again, the man began to carefully and gently massage her palm. However, a few seconds later, Thomas, without letting go of Tiffany's hand with one of his palms, began to pull the glove off the second with his teeth. The girl was extremely amazed at this action on the part of the aristocrat man. The touch of the man's bare hand was very pleasant to the girl. She tried to thank him for his help, but Thomas said that there was no need for gratitude, because it was his fault that he did not take a doctor with him. And Oliver stood quietly on the sidelines, offendedly crossing his arms over his chest. The attention of everyone in the compartment was attracted by a knock on the door. Without looking up from the girl's hand, Thomas gave permission to enter. It was the guide who asked the colonel when to cook and serve dinner. Thomas was surprised at how quickly time flew by. He turned to Tiffany asking if the girl could handle a full dinner. The girl thanked the man for his concern and replied that, of course, she would not be able to handle such a dinner and would only make do with something liquid, like broth. Without even turning to the conductor and continuing to massage the girl's palm, Thomas said that dinner could be served, where the broth needed to be prepared and served for Miss Elizabeth. Having said that everything will be done and the dishes will be served as soon as possible, the conductor left. And Thomas, as if nothing had happened, continued to massage the girl's palm. Throwing a sidelong glance at the colonel, Tiffany noted to herself that Thomas, a true aristocrat, did not even glance in the direction of the conductor. The girl was again flooded with memories from the book, this time concerning the character of Thomas. The girl was convinced that this man was definitely different from all the other aristocrats. But she immediately noted that Thomas was somehow not very similar to the character who was familiar to her from the book. And again, all her thoughts ended with the fact that her main concern was Oliver. who definitely needed her. It doesn't matter what world, this or that, she now lives only for this boy. She convinced herself that there was no point in getting used to this world because she had a duty that she must fulfill, which threatened her with death. But Thomas did not stop massaging his palm. The massage was relaxing, and the girl's eyes gradually began to close. And so, after another couple of minutes, Tiffany was already in a deep sleep. After some time, a sumptuous dinner was served. While the conductor was making preparations, Thomas invited Tiffany to the table. Not yet fully recovered from sleep, the girl made it clear with a wave of her hand that she had heard the man's invitation, confusing Oliver with her actions. Heading to the table, Tiffany thought that she did not experience any strong feeling of hunger. The girl was very frightened when someone suddenly grabbed her dress. It was Oliver, whom the girl asked why he grabbed her dress. The boy's face looked very tense, and his concentrated gaze was directed somewhere forward. Tiffany looked in surprise at the strange expression on the boy's face, and Oliver looked at how, under the cape of the first floor of the cart on which dinner was delivered, the conductor was looking for something. Seeing the object of the boy's attention, Tiffany also looked towards the conductor. At the same moment, the conductor quickly stood up and turned to face the girl and the others, clutching a rifle in his hand. Tiffany's reaction was appropriate, where she began to hide Oliver from the killer, covering him with herself. The girl's sudden movement swept the dishes and cutlery prepared for dinner off the table. And immediately after the sounds of breaking dishes, there was the sound of a gunshot. Thomas, meanwhile, turned to face the killer and pulled out his pistol. Realizing that there had been a mistake, the killer hastily reloaded his rifle, trying to get there before the colonel was ready to shoot at him. And Tiffany, hiding the boy behind her, hid with him behind the ottoman on which she had recently slept so sweetly, feeling the hands of the man she liked. She mentally tried to reassure herself that, based on the events of the book, nothing bad should happen now, and the killer must now die at the hands of Thomas. However, if she wants there to be evidence that the killer was manipulated by Daniel Morris, he should be left alive. The girl's reasoning was interrupted by Oliver, who suddenly began to get up. Tiffany tried to stop him, saying it was dangerous. But the determined boy told his aunt to stay in the shelter. Oliver rushed as hard as he could towards the killer. And the conductor, having already managed to reload the rifle, raised the weapon, pointing it at the boy and pressing the trigger. But instead of a shot, there was only a soft click. The rifle misfired. Oliver, without stopping his movement, made a slashing motion with his hand towards the killer, from which the latter dodged. A table knife flashed in the boy's hand. The killer guide, without wasting time fiddling with the rifle, pulled out a bladed weapon from behind his back, a sword. He tried to attack the boy with it, but Oliver managed to dodge the blow. Thomas took aim a long time ago but did not shoot for fear of hitting his nephew. Tiffany continued to sit on the floor, not understanding when the child managed to grab the knife. Calling the child a useless bastard, the killer raised his hand again to strike. And this time the blow reached its target. Oliver fell to the floor unconscious, dropping his weapon with which he rushed to protect his aunt. Tiffany, not at all worried about her life, rushed to the boy with a scream. Checking whether the boy was alive, she put his head on her hand, and the killer had already raised his sword over her, preparing to lower it on the girl and end her life. Realizing that this was the end, Tiffany covered her hand from the impending death. But then a shot sounded, and the movement of the guide's hand with the sword was interrupted, where blood sprayed from his hand and the weapon flew to the floor. Not directly, but tangentially, but the killer's sword still reached its target and passed through Tiffany's hand. Thomas, who finally shot the killer, drew attention to the girl's scream of pain. Tiffany grabbed her wounded hand, squeezing it convulsively and wincing in pain. She looked at Oliver sitting next to him, who, as it turned out, had been hit not by the blade of the sword, but by the hilt, and said that it was dangerous, as she had said. The boy did not understand what was happening and simply repeated the question why his aunt did this. And Tiffany just looked at the boy, who was very touched by his aunt's actions. Thomas silently watched this scene of love from the side. He was also very worried that the girl was injured. The killer, taking advantage of this pause, decided to attempt to escape. Holding his wounded hand, he rushed as hard as he could out of the compartment, where he made an unsuccessful attempt, which attracted the attention of Thomas. Without any ceremony, the conductor ran away, pushing aside everyone who got in his way. Thomas rushed after him, gradually catching up with him. Choosing the right moment, the colonel stopped and fired a shot. At the same moment, he heard the voice of Elizabeth, who shouted that Thomas should not kill the conductor, since he was needed alive to find out the identity of the customer. Thomas, turning around, shouted that the girl did not need to be here and asked her to return to the compartment. But Tiffany shouted that it didn't matter and drew the colonel's attention to the fact that the killer was continuing to try to escape. Without even turning his head, Thomas raised his hand, clutching the pistol, and fired, this time hitting the killer in the leg. This impressed the girl, both in the part where Thomas shot without looking, and in the part where he apparently did not listen to the girl at all, that the intruder does not need to be killed. Meanwhile, the killer dropped to one knee and did not move. But then he straightened up again and continued his movement. Thomas raised his gun again without a word. and the killer had to take just one step to find himself on an open platform from which he could jump from the train. The decision had to be made quickly, and Tiffany looked around for something that would prevent the killer from escaping without killing him. A rather heavy pepper shaker caught her eye, which it was decided to use as a weapon. The short swing and throw did not take long to arrive. And then the throwing weapon flew straight to the target, which was the back of the head of the killer trying to escape. The delighted girl noted to herself that it was not in vain that for some time she attended the baseball section at school in her former world. The killer, meanwhile, began to lose his balance and fall on his side into the door that he himself had opened. And a moment later, he fell out completely and disappeared. Tiffany ran up and only managed to catch the moment when the legs of the conductor, who had fallen over the fence, disappeared into the darkness. Without saying a word, the girl sadly looked into the distant place that had swallowed up the guide. Thomas approached and found the girl in a strange state, where she was smiling for no reason. Turning to the man, Tiffany asked if the guide had died, to which the man concluded that most likely yes. Without saying a word in response, the girl turned away and returned her gaze to the darkness rushing nearby, from which branches of bushes and trees stuck out in places. It was a shock. Thomas helped Tiffany back into the compartment, where she sat, clutching her head with her hand in which thoughts could not subside, where the girl only thought about the fact that today she had turned into a killer and tried to somehow justify herself, remembering that according to the plot of the novel, this man was supposed to die anyway. Oliver looked sadly at his aunt's condition and at her hand, which was bandaged at the site of the injury. And suddenly he spoke, saying that Elizabeth would be better off returning to their village. Such a statement distracted the girl from her dark thoughts, and she asked where the boy was sending her. And Oliver repeated that his aunt had better return to their village because she still didn't want to go to the winter forest. Thomas, who clearly did not like this idea, also reacted to these boys' statements. And Tiffany asked the boy a question about his future plans, to which he replied that he would continue on his way, since the aunt herself said that he should meet his grandparents. The boy's words were difficult for Tiffany's mind to process. Then she asked why he made that scene at home, as a result of which she had to go with him, to which the boy lightheartedly replied that now he had changed his mind. But the girl was quickly found, saying that now she too had changed her mind and wanted to go to the winter forest. The boy did not at all expect that his own weapon would be used against him, and Tiffany continued to play her role, pathetically declaring that she liked to ride on such a luxurious train, wear expensive clothes, and in general, whenever she might still have a chance to live in luxury. Enraged that everything was not going the way he wanted, the boy could not find anything better than to shout that his aunt had just been wounded, and she was only thinking about dresses and luxury. To which Tiffany quickly responded by asking a counter-question about how the boy himself then went straight to the killer without hesitation, which drove Oliver into a complete dead end. Finally, Thomas found it necessary to intervene in this skirmish, where he supported the girl's words and added that this time the boy was very lucky. And now Oliver's uncle and aunt were already jointly scolding him for his reckless behavior, where the aunt showed much more zeal and expressed everything about how a boy should take care of his life. The instructions from the adults continued for a very long time, and in the end, the child began to shout for them to stop these moral teachings. The boy said that he did not think that it could be dangerous and was only trying to protect his aunt, and these words gave the girl pleasure. After this, the boy added that he took his aunt with him for her comfort and not to expose her to danger. Such adult reasoning from the mouth of a 10-year-old child had a strong effect on Tiffany. And after the word danger uttered by the boy, she automatically felt her wounded hand. The girl understood perfectly well that if she stayed with the boy, she would expose herself to much greater danger than she faced today. And suddenly she was struck by the thought of how the boy's life could have turned out if, as soon as she woke up in this body, she immediately ran away, abandoning him. If she had done this, she would definitely have been able to escape the outcome that the pages of the novel had prepared for her. But everything is as it is now, where she chose a different path and stayed with Elizabeth's nephew. And all because it was a pity to leave him all alone. She also felt sorry for herself, where she too would have been left completely alone in an unfamiliar world. But now, with the boy's proposal, she had the last chance to escape from the consequences of her choice. Finishing her thoughts, Tiffany first looked at Oliver. Then she turned her gaze to Thomas, who, no less than the boy, was waiting to see what decision the girl would make. After which she lowered her eyes again and paused for a moment before she began to speak. And she turned to Oliver, where she said that the boy was right, which made him surprised and clarify whether his aunt was really returning to the village. However, the answer to his question was the word no, which again surprised the boy, since his aunt's position now became completely incomprehensible to him. Without keeping anyone else waiting, Tiffany loudly declared that she would continue her journey to the winter forest, not as an aunt, but as Oliver's mother, simultaneously remembering everything that she had already experienced during this short trip, where she experienced the most joyful feelings from new, beautiful outfits. She experienced wild fear from being attacked and injured. She put on herself the sweet but heavy shackles of affection. Of course, there was no certainty that she could change Elizabeth's fate, which did not mean that she could not try. Where the girl found it beautiful was if Thomas also continued to live. And little Oliver will avoid terrible mental trauma from the loss of family and friends. The girl finished out loud by saying that she was now too attached to both men to return anywhere. Amazed, Oliver asked the girl about what she just said, to which Tiffany replied that if any troubles appear in the winter forest, then it will be much easier to deal with them if you have some kind of power in your hands, where the aunt will not have much weight, unlike the mother of the Duke's grandson. Oliver was not at all pleased with his aunt's decision since, in his opinion, such measures only further confirmed the danger of the trip. To which Tiffany innocently stated that Oliver and Thomas would be able to protect her, which caused a very violent reaction from the boy. Realizing that he was unable to persuade his aunt, Oliver turned to the colonel, asking him to say at least something, and at the same time almost calling him uncle, which made Tiffany laugh very much, who noticed how the boy managed to say the first syllable denoting the degree of relationship. Well, Thomas, whose reaction was expected by both the boy and the girl, easily and simply stated that what Miss Elizabeth had proposed was not such a bad plan. This was clearly not the answer Oliver expected from his uncle, whom he had already almost called uncle once. He used the main argument that was supposed to influence the colonel, saying that if his aunt introduced herself as his mother, this would directly connect her with Thomas's brother. Tiffany understood this too, but she didn't know what Thomas thought of her, whether he saw her as an object of future love or whether he simply treated her well because she raised Oliver. Well, Thomas suddenly asked the boy why he should be worried that Elizabeth would allegedly become the woman of his late brother, to which the boy did not know what to answer, because he could not directly state that he suspected the presence of feelings between the colonel and his aunt. For a couple of minutes, the man sat and waited to see if Oliver could say something to his question. However, without waiting for an answer, he told the boy that, as Miss Elizabeth had said, they must protect her. After these words, the boy's stomach literally twisted, and Tiffany, worried about the boy on the outside, was rejoicing on the inside because Thomas supported her. However, she told Oliver, who was sitting in the chair, that she did not know where he had picked up so much of what he was talking about during the argument about leaving, but she would not give him any more newspapers to read. Then Tiffany straightened up, threw her hand up, and in the tone of a meticulous teacher, said that the boy should try to call her mom right now. Such a request greatly surprised Oliver, who was by no means ready for it and refused to say anything like that. And in response to the girl's arguments that she needed to get used to being called mom so as not to accidentally make a mistake, he said that everything would be fine, just like that time when he already played the role of calling her mom. But Tiffany did not let up, playfully approaching the boy, declaring that last time he did the task so well, so what's stopping him from calling her mom now? The girl's game was interrupted by a bright blue glow suddenly bursting into the window of their spacious compartment. The amazed girl slowly turned to the window, where she saw snowy mountain peaks, snow-covered trees, and snowflakes falling from the sky. Without hiding her emotions, Tiffany went to the window and called Oliver to look at the falling snow, to which the boy replied without any enthusiasm that he had already seen snow and was no longer interested in it. The girl was surprised that in their village there is no snow even in winter, but here it snows even in spring. Tiffany then stated that although the boy did not show emotions, he was seeing snow for the first time, which Oliver could not deny. Tiffany remembered how this episode was described in the novel, where the boy was so happy to see snow that he even blushed. Now, sitting in front of her was some kind of direct opposite of the book Oliver. And then it dawned on the girl that the boy was behaving with restraint only because she, his Aunt Elizabeth, was here, which was not in the plot of the book. Saying that the boy was very cute, she jumped up to him and began to run her hand through his hair, causing a violent response from Oliver. Tiffany's actions were interrupted by Thomas's voice announcing that they had arrived at their destination. On the one hand, it seemed that the local station was no different from the one from which they began their journey. However, there was still a difference, and it was that everything around was covered with snow, emitting a bluish glow. Not having had time to spend even a few minutes in the local conditions, Tiffany, sneezing loudly, concluded that the local weather was definitely not happy with her. And then she thought about whether she could even survive in these foreign lands. The girl was distracted from these sad thoughts by the call of Thomas, who invited Miss Elizabeth to follow him. Walking up to the man, Tiffany wondered how they would be able to get to the estate with so much stuff. To which Thomas explained that before leaving, he sent a telegram and a carriage should arrive for them any minute. While the girl noted for herself the existence of telegrams in this world and drew a parallel with her world of mobile communications and the internet, the colonel moved forward, again inviting his companions to follow him. From the outside, the train station looked much more impressive than the one from which the heroes began their journey. Stopping abruptly, Thomas noted that, contrary to his expectations, the crew was already here. And indeed, just outside the gate there was a luxurious carriage, next to which there was a man making signs to the colonel. He shouted for the young duke to come to him, but the colonel could not recognize his face. However, when he got closer, the man recognized the head groom of their family, who told those who approached that the Duke and Duchess were looking forward to them. To which Thomas stated that they had arrived on schedule and they had no reason to express their impatience. Here, the man meeting the travelers drew attention to Oliver standing behind him, immediately asking the boy who he was and noting his striking resemblance to his late father George. But immediately realizing the man greeting us, having first apologized for his rudeness, introduced himself as Jimmy, the head groom of the Richardson family. In response, the boy said without much enthusiasm that he was pleased to meet you, and Tiffany noted to herself that this man was very kind and open and had probably served this family for a long time. In addition, the girl noted that she did not remember the groom at all from the book, where she, however, did not particularly pay attention to such minor characters. Meanwhile, Jimmy turned his attention to Tiffany, asking what kind of beautiful girl was accompanying the boy and the colonel. Since the first impression was very important, Tiffany, taking the most open pose, said in a gentle voice that her name was Elizabeth Rowdy and she was the mother of the boy. At this point, the meeting of travelers and the first acquaintance were over, and soon Thomas, Oliver, and Tiffany had already arrived at the estate of the Duchy of Winter Forest. Moving towards the castle, Tiffany mentally concluded that they had arrived on the battlefield, where her own life was at stake. At the entrance, they were met by servants who, having inquired about the well-being of the trip, which was required by the rules of etiquette, said that they would now escort the guests inside. Heading inside, Tiffany thought that the local landscapes might well be to her liking. In her thoughts that the Winter Forest fully lived up to its name, the girl did not notice how she was closely examining Thomas's face, which immediately provoked a corresponding reaction in the form of a question about what was wrong with his face. To which Tiffany replied that the man's face was fine and she was just admiring his beauty. This answer made a very strong impression on the colonel, where he could not find a single word in response. Seeing how embarrassed her interlocutor was, Tiffany hastened to say that she just said this as a joke. At the same time, he thought to himself that the man's reaction looked very cute. And so Tiffany and her companions found themselves inside a spacious room, where they were met by Princess Mary's former maid of honor, Thomas's mother and current Duchess of Winterwood, Evelyn Richardson. After Princess Mary died, it was necessary to find someone who could raise George as his own son. And the closest maid of the deceased princess was the first contender. Duke Julian fell in love with Evelyn with all his heart and did not hesitate to propose marriage to her. Of course, this situation caused a lot of talk about whether Princess Mary's death was faked. Standing opposite the Duchess who met them, Thomas reported to his mother about the arrival of the heir to the dukedom, Oliver, with his mother Elizabeth. To which Duchess Evelyn replied that she was already aware and invited the guests to change clothes and go to the table. While the maids were preparing Tiffany for the feast, the girl reasoned and came to the conclusion that she would not be able to eat much, because most likely she would face a detailed interrogation from members of the Richardson family. At the same time, it was necessary to take into account the preferences of the Duchess, who herself gave more time to George. For some reason, Evelyn gave her own son Thomas to be raised by a nanny. Tiffany's hands were literally shaking from the flow of thoughts and nervous tension before the upcoming difficult conversation. She prayed to the Almighty to help her survive all these trials and complete this sudden story in a positive way. Soon, all the preparations were completed, and the whole family, in its new composition, gathered at the table for the first time. The Duchess was the first to start the conversation, expressing her admiration for Elizabeth for the fact that she raised a child alone, and also offered to talk about the girl's family. But Tiffany responded with gratitude for her attention and stories about how her parents passed away early. And the girl ended her short story by saying that Oliver was the only relative left. The Duchess was greatly touched by the girl's story, where she immediately expressed her sympathy for the current circumstances. However, Tiffany cheerfully reassured the woman, saying that she was coping well with her responsibilities as a mother. At the same time, Tiffany, automatically glancing at Thomas, thought that the Duchess was somehow overly kind and caring, and that's not how she should behave, if we remember the events of the novel. And Evelyn, taking a sip from her glass, continued speaking, where this time she expressed her joy at the fact that, thanks to Elizabeth, the line of Princess Mary continues. And to the Duchess's question about whether the girl was an aristocrat, Tiffany replied that, only up to her father's generation. The next question from the woman was regarding Elizabeth's eyes, where the Duchess was interested in who she had inherited such an unusual color from. To which Tiffany replied that she got this eye color not from her parents, but a generation later, from her grandmother, which immediately raised the question of what kind of family Elizabeth's grandmother was. But resourceful Tiffany replied that she knew practically nothing about her grandmother's life and family. After which the Duchess once again admired the color of the girl's eyes, saying that such a color is a very rare occurrence. Tiffany never ceased to be surprised by the Duchess's strange behavior, which was completely incompatible with the events of the book. But suddenly Evelyn voiced that it would be excellent if Elizabeth's son inherited this eye color. Tiffany almost choked on a piece of meat from what she heard. After all, Oliver looked exactly like his father George, which should have pleased the Duchess most of all. But her statement about the preference for resemblance to Elizabeth directly indicated that something definitely did not go according to plan in this story. The Duke, who was sitting at the table, did not utter a single word the entire time. Tiffany recalled that the Duke's name did not appear very often in the novel, and now he, apparently, was not very interested in his new relative. Throughout the entire story, the Duke's attention was directed exclusively to his new wife, Evelyn. But then Tiffany remembered the words of the Colonel, who said that the Duke was looking forward to the arrival of his grandson with great impatience. And looking at the boy, the girl thought that now Oliver was probably very disappointed with this reception. And then the Duchess turned to the boy, asking if his name was reported to her correctly, Oliver. To which the boy replied that that was indeed his name, calling the Duchess grandmother. The woman then asked if he liked the food, where she explained that she did not know what small children liked, but told the cooks to prepare the best. But Oliver, for some reason, was in no hurry to answer the question, thereby causing a storm of emotions in Tiffany, who mentally tried to tell him that the boy should not ignore the Duchess. And finally, Oliver said that it was the first time in his life that he was tasting such delicious food, thereby bringing relief to the girl sitting next to him. Evelyn was also pleased with the answer and asked what food Oliver liked best, to which the boy immediately replied that it was chocolate cake with apricot jam. Delighted by this answer, the Duchess said that their chef came from those places where confectionery was popular, and tomorrow he would prepare such a cake. And Tiffany noted to herself that this dessert was very exquisite and she had never seen or tasted it in the village where she lived with Oliver for a month. From which the girl concluded that the boy went to the pastry shop with Thomas in secret from her and became very angry that she was not invited along. But she was abruptly distracted from thoughts of sweets by the Duchess's speech, where Evelyn turned to her son with a question about when he plans to return to duty. At the same time, with the naked eye, one could notice in the woman's hands how much she was worried, which caused Tiffany quite a surprise. Meanwhile, Thomas, in response to his mother's question, explained that due to the fact that he had accumulated many vacation days, he decided to spend some time in his native nest. The next words of the Duchess, that in this case he would be able to accompany Elizabeth and her son to the capital, literally shocked the girl. Evelyn explained that Oliver has royal blood in his veins, and therefore they are obliged to introduce him to the royal family. Tiffany continued to think that according to the events of the book, everything happened differently, and the conversation about introducing the royal family did not arise until Oliver had a defender in the person of his uncle. And then the Duchess voiced something that almost gave the girl a seizure, where the woman said that for a trip to the capital, she would need to choose suitable outfits. At that very moment, Tiffany remembered all the horrors of fitting when she picked out outfits for herself, accompanied by Thomas and Oliver. And the girl immediately reported that she had more than enough clothes, which were kindly presented to her by the Colonel. Surprised by this address to Thomas, the Duchess asked who told the girl to call her son that. Confused by such a remark, Tiffany said that it was her personal choice where she could address a man less formally, since she had the appropriate permission from him. To which Evelyn noted that this is the only way a girl should act, because now they are all a full-fledged family. The Duchess addressed her next remark to her son, reproaching him for the fact that, having bought clothes, he left the beautiful lady completely without jewelry, and also offendedly saying that this is not what she taught him and she is very disappointed in him. Tiffany, feeling extremely awkward in this situation, tried to somehow soften the situation. But suddenly the Duchess said that all this was not important, since in any case Elizabeth needed to choose an image that corresponded to the status of their family, and the woman would personally select the jewelry. The girl was beside herself from the surprise of the statement, and did not know at all what to say in response, making some isolated sounds that were not connected by logic or meaning. At the end of dinner, Thomas, Oliver, and Tiffany moved along the long and luxuriously furnished corridors of the estate. Walking behind everyone, Tiffany noted how well-built Thomas was, where even his gait showed a strict aristocratic upbringing. The girl came to the conclusion that the Duchess and her son were quite similar in character. And then she drew attention to one of the portraits that hung on the wall of the corridor. Stopping, Tiffany looked with interest at the beautiful female face of the girl depicted in the picture. Turning to Thomas, the girl inquired about whose image was depicted in this picture, to which the Colonel replied that this was a portrait of his brother George's own mother, Princess Mary. Tiffany noted with amazement that Oliver looked very much like this girl. And suddenly the girl took a closer look at the princess's eyes, where she discovered that their color coincided with the color of her eyes, after which she immediately remembered the Duchess's expressed regret that Elizabeth's son had not inherited the color of his mother's eyes. All this suggested that Evelyn did not love George, and would not love Oliver, since she was only interested in the princess's pedigree. Soon the company found itself in the desired part of the estate, where Thomas told Oliver to follow one of the servants, who would show the boy to his room. And when the Colonel was alone with Elizabeth, he pointed to one of the doors and said that Miss Rowdy could use this room. This was a great relief for the girl, who dreamed of finally relaxing in peace and quiet. But her attention was suddenly attracted by how Thomas, instead of going to his room, suddenly sat down on one of the sofas in the common room. With an imperious gesture of his hand, he signaled to the servants standing nearby. And at that very moment, one of the maids rushed towards him, carrying a teapot and mugs. While the girl was arranging the tea-drinking utensils, it was impossible not to notice how worried she was. For Tiffany, the maid's reaction to being near Thomas was surprising and thought-provoking. But the colonel did not allow the girl to finish her thoughts with his offer to sit down and join the tea party, where he immediately continued, saying that he stayed for a reason, but wanted to discuss with the girl a very important issue regarding jewelry, which his mother mentioned at dinner. Not yet understanding the meaning of what the colonel said, the girl suggested that maybe she should refuse the Duchess's offer. But Thomas said that this is not the case at all, but that he really should have taken care of decorations for Elizabeth in advance, where he remembers her words spoken to Oliver back in the village that she would like to have a lot of decorations. From what she heard, the girl almost dropped her mug of tea. And then she began to convince the man that everything was fine, she was just joking, and would gratefully accept the Duchess's gift. However, the colonel said that undoubtedly his mother would give the girl something very valuable, but this did not detract from his duty to provide Elizabeth with jewelry for everyday wear. Tiffany tried to convince Thomas that the Duchess's gift would be enough for her, but the man was adamant, saying that it was completely ridiculous for someone from their dukedom to have only one set of jewelry. After which, he promised the girl that he would make every effort and choose the best jewelry for her in each color. Then the girl literally jumped out of her seat, saying that if a man gives her at least one set, then taking into account the Duchess's gift, it will already be a lot. However, Thomas, again using a gesture of disagreement, again said that only 2 sets of jewelry at the girl's disposal is ridiculous. Stunned, Tiffany sat down and confusedly asked the colonel how much jewelry he thought she needed. Having figured something out in his mind, Thomas said that if the jewelry is changed at least 3 times a day, the girl needs to have at least 1,000 sets. Tiffany's reaction to such a statement was more than violent, which could be seen in the facial expressions of her face without any words. The man added that such a quantity of jewelry can also be perceived as a reserve of funds for a rainy day. Thinking that it was not very good to sell gifts, Tiffany asked out loud why she needed such a supply. But such a question clearly brought her interlocutor into some kind of stupor. Having received no answer, the girl said that she did not need so much jewelry and did not intend to sell gifts. The intention to keep his gifts greatly surprised the colonel, and Tiffany asked why this was so surprising to him. To which the man replied that he was simply very happy that Elizabeth planned to keep his gifts. Now it's the girl's turn to be surprised by the words of her interlocutor. Meanwhile, the man explained that he did not put much importance into gifts, and was always surprised at how his army comrades scrupulously choose gifts for their girls with whom they go on dates. But now, having heard the girl's intention to keep his gifts, he finally understood the feeling that visits a man courting a girl. The maids standing nearby were stunned by what they heard. Tiffany experienced no less horror, thinking about what this man was saying in front of everyone. Looking at the simple expression on Thomas's face, Tiffany thought that in fact he was indifferent to her. It was just the specificity and manner of communication of a man, which caused such statements similar to which had already taken place. And among the maids, whispers had already begun that George was not enough for this new mistress. Now she had switched to Thomas. And Tiffany could only note with regret that rumors arise in such an absurd way. Already in a noticeably upset voice, Tiffany said that this whole situation is a heavy burden for her, and she really doesn't need so much jewelry where she can get by with just the Duchess's gift. Realizing that he had clearly overdone it with attention, Thomas asked the girl to accept at least 2 sets from him. No longer knowing how to fight off the colonel's insistence, the girl once again began to say that she had no need for jewelry. But the man interrupted her, saying that she needed to have at least such a small amount of jewelry, and he would not offer more. Tiffany mentally concluded that the man was particularly persistent. Exhaling forcefully, which meant complete surrender, the girl said that she was ready to accept the man's last offer. Having said that the jewelry would be picked out for them in the very near future, Thomas finally retired to his room, leaving the girl alone. Very tired from today's eventful day, Tiffany collapsed on the bed and soon fell asleep. 2 huge black penguins with the hairstyles of the Duchess and her son reproached the little penguin for the fact that all available money was provided exclusively in the form of precious stones. It was a nightmare for Tiffany, whose subconscious was imprinted by conversations about jewelry. The gray-haired man, adjusting his clothes with a graceful gesture, introduced himself as Martin, the butler of the Richardson family. Having said that you can contact him with any questions, the man introduced Elizabeth candidates for the position of her personal maid. Where Martin noted that since Miss Elizabeth arrived from the south, candidates who lived in the provinces were selected for the position of maid, which, however, did not in any way detract from their abilities. Tiffany understood that she could not understand anything about these girls just by looking at them, and she decided to choose according to this principle, where the maid was to be the girl whose appearance was least likely to be unpleasant. Before she could point to a dark-haired young girl with pigtails, she immediately bowed, saying that she would be happy to serve her mistress. After which she introduced herself, calling herself Lori and saying that the lady made the right choice. Soon Tiffany and her new friend were already in the room. where the girl cheerfully asked Miss Elizabeth if she would like tea to be prepared. To which Tiffany refused, but instead invited Lori to sit down, since she had questions for her. The girl was very surprised by such a strange first request from her new mistress. Politely asking for forgiveness, the maid accepted Tiffany's offer and sat down opposite her. And Tiffany's first question was whether the maids were afraid of the Duchess's son, Colonel Thomas. Lori did not quite understand the question asked and asked to clarify what her mistress wanted to know. And Tiffany explained that yesterday she was a little embarrassed by the maid's behavior. When pouring the tea, the girl was shaking all over, as if she was very afraid of the man. But the girl immediately added that if this caused any inconvenience, then Lori might not answer the question posed. However, the maid said that she didn't mind answering it at all. She was just trying to find the right words. And so, having found the right words, Lori said that Sir Thomas is not the kind of person the servants should deal with, because most of the maids were fired by him, so the rest are just trying to keep their place. Such a statement, of course, amazed the girl, and she asked how bad everything was in the gentleman's character. But the girl immediately corrected herself, saying that she had presented the information incorrectly, and in fact, the colonel was a very good person. And she began to explain everything from the beginning, saying that Mr. George was very handsome and royal blood flowed in his veins. But Thomas was not at all deprived of beauty, although he was not a follower of the royal line, and was also slightly rude. Tiffany noted to herself that her maid was absolutely correct in noticing both the rudeness and the beauty of the man. And Lori continued the story, explaining that many maids, in order to raise their status, tried to flirt with Mr. Thomas. What the man didn't like at all, and without any regret he fired every slutty maid. His half-brother George behaved opposite to Thomas. Over the years, the events became surrounded by rumors. Besides, the colonel rarely visited the estate and spent a lot of time in his regiment. And therefore now everyone believes that he is capable of expelling the servants for the smallest offense. Now Tiffany understood why the maids were shaking so much in front of Thomas, who in himself was also quite strict. The girl reproached herself for doubting Thomas's integrity, not thinking that he treated the servants badly. Here Tiffany had a new question about how such a young girl knew the events of many years ago. To which Lori explained that her mother works in the kitchen in the estate, and therefore Lori herself has lived here from an early age, has heard and knows all the rumors and stories. After which she added that her age would not in the least prevent her from performing her duties as a servant of the mistress. Concluding her story, the girl proudly stated that she was chosen as a candidate only because she was very smart and resourceful, despite her age. Noting to herself that this girl was very nice, Tiffany said out loud that, apparently, she was not mistaken in choosing a maid. At which Lori screamed joyfully and said that Mrs. Elizabeth could always count on her. Life on the Winter Forest estate went on as usual, where Oliver's education began, where he was taught music. The literature teacher admired how well the boy understood the most complex works. For a long time now, the gray-haired history teacher eagerly noted that Oliver seemed to already know his subject. The foreign language teacher also spoke about the child's incredible mental abilities. For Tiffany, this state of affairs was another oddity, since according to the events of the book, Oliver never showed signs of genius. The original Oliver could not keep up with such a huge flow of information, and it was very difficult for him to get involved in such an unusual rhythm of life. And his uncle did not understand that it was difficult for a boy to join the life of a nobleman from ordinary life, declaring that he simply needed to try harder. Thomas from the book tried to somehow teach the boy to cope with all difficulties. But the villain Daniel did not miss every opportunity to find fault with the boy, regularly declaring that Oliver was not even able to understand the basics. Of course, Thomas stood up to defend the heir to the dukedom every time. Thoughts about why today's Oliver is so different from the original one did not give the girl any peace. Turning to her nephew sitting nearby, Tiffany asked if the boy was coping with his studies since a lot had fallen on him. To which the child replied very rudely that his aunt should not care that he might not be able to cope. This reaction from the boy greatly surprised and upset the girl. But she continued her mental investigation, coming to the conclusion that the only thing consistent with the original plot was that Oliver first lived with his aunt in the village. And then he went with Thomas, who appeared, to the Duchy of Winter Forest. In all other respects, there is now not even a trace left of the real Oliver from the novel. And suddenly the thought flashed through Tiffany's head that she somehow ended up in this body after death. Could it be that in the body of Elizabeth's nephew it is also now not Oliver, but some other person? But then his actions became incomprehensible, where, if this man understands where he is, then for what purpose he stayed with his completely useless aunt, and fenced himself off from his most powerful ally, Thomas. Tiffany didn't know how to test this hypothesis since asking directly would be the height of human stupidity. Here, the girl realized that the characters of other characters in the novel, for example, the Duchess and Thomas, also differed from the original ones. So, perhaps the girl's conclusions were hasty, and everything that is happening now is simply a consequence of the changes in the plot that she herself made, changing Elizabeth's behavior. After thinking a little more, Tiffany decided to let go of all these thoughts for now. Because the basic plot hasn't changed much, which means we need to focus on the actions of the main villain, Daniel. Then Oliver unexpectedly turned to her, asking what his aunt was doing. To which Tiffany calmly replied that she was knitting. The thing is that Oliver was constantly busy with his studies and went to classes. In connection with this, Tiffany had a huge amount of free time, which she spent completely alone. Elizabeth from the novel's hobby was reading philosophical books, which did not really appeal to Tiffany. And so she decided to remember what she had learned a long time ago during labor lessons in junior high school. True, Tiffany's knitting was very, very mediocre. After looking at the process for a while, Oliver said that his aunt needed to try hard for her to succeed. And the girl tried to justify herself by saying that she was knitting for the first time in her life, which is why everything was turning out so badly so far. To which the boy said that there was nothing wrong with that, since the main thing is that the activity should be enjoyable. Left alone, Tiffany thought that now she would probably completely lose the boy's respect, and at this rate, she would soon be alone forever. It was necessary to act immediately, and the girl inviting Lori asked if she knitted well. And so, under the strict guidance of her young maid, Tiffany began to learn how to knit normally. After putting in a lot of effort, Tiffany sat and looked at what she finally came up with. And when asked how Lori found her work, the young girl enthusiastically stated that the lady did a great job. Standing in front of the mirror, Tiffany, continuing to admire what she had done, decided that she would give this scarf to Oliver. And then she had the idea that she could knit another scarf exactly the same for herself, and she and her nephew would show off together. All that remains is to understand whether the boy will like the scarf and also that his aunt will have the same scarf. However, the doubts were short-lived, and now Tiffany sat down to create a second scarf. But at that moment, there was a knock on the door. The maid came in and reported that the Duchess was looking for Miss Elizabeth. The girl was a little surprised and worried about this news, but without keeping the Duchess waiting, she headed towards her. The diamonds in the jewelry shimmered with all colors, giving the impression that the stones had some kind of internal illumination. And Tiffany was in a state of stupor, listening to the Duchess's words about the girl accepting her gift. Martin immediately inserted his word, saying that the diamonds mined in the mines of the duchy are famous throughout the kingdom. Looking at the Duchess in fear, Tiffany could not believe that she was being given such an expensive gift, and tried to say something in response. But Evelyn calmly said that there was no need to worry but just accept this gift. And immediately the Duchess gave instructions that the servants should help Elizabeth put on the jewelry, which was instantly fulfilled, and Tiffany was able to feel the full weight of the precious stones on her neck. Evelyn, meanwhile, assessed how the jewelry looked on the girl, declaring that everything looked very good. And Tiffany thought that if she went out with such jewelry, she would definitely attract the attention of the entire public, which could not be allowed, since she did not want to stand out at all. The girl did not want to accept this gift at all. However, from her experience of communicating with members of the Richardson family, she had long ago drawn one conclusion. No matter what words are spoken to them, they do not listen to any of them. Returning to her room with the box containing the jewel, Tiffany began to nervously move from corner to corner, thinking about what to do. And the first thought was that she could not allow this jewelry to be stolen. But then she caught herself thinking that she was beginning to behave exactly as the real Elizabeth would have behaved, and throwing away thoughts about the jewel, she returned to knitting. But the thoughts that if she lost the jewelry, she would never pay for it kept coming back, making the girl very nervous. After some time, Thomas returned to the estate, having been absent for some time, where the reasons for his absence were not known to Tiffany. But despite this, the girl noted to herself that she was very glad to see this man. The man looked very tired, with beads of sweat slowly running down his face. Lori, seeing the out-of-breath gentleman, immediately rushed to him with a glass of water. Thomas, without saying a word, drained his glass with pleasure and gulp. But then his tired gaze suddenly noticed a box standing nearby, and Thomas immediately asked the girl what it was. To which the girl absent-mindedly replied that it was a gift from his mother, the Duchess. After these words, the man annoyedly said that he was late and was now one step behind his mother. And when Tiffany asked why he thought so, Thomas explained that he also wanted to give the girl a gift. And he immediately took out a small box from his inner pocket, which he handed to the girl. Only now the girl realized why the man had not been in the estate for so long. She was extremely pleased with such attention from Thomas, and she blushed deeply. Without accepting the box, Tiffany embarrassedly repeated that she was extremely grateful to the man for the attention and care he showed. And the colonel continued to be annoyed, saying that he was still late, since it is always the first gift that is remembered. To which Tiffany replied that it doesn't matter at all who was first, because this is not about presenting an engagement ring. With which the man, on the whole, was able to agree and even smiled a little, saying that there really was no wedding ring in the box. Finally, the girl picked up the box, which was accompanied by the man's request to still accept this modest gift. She understood that the man was in a hurry, wanting to be the first to present the gift that he had bought especially for her, and therefore the girl was very interested in what was inside. But before she had time to open and see the contents of the box, suddenly the front door swung open. And at that same moment, the room was filled with many people who brought with them some boxes and placed them everywhere. And when the boxes were opened, Tiffany was simply speechless, because each one contained amazing jewelry. When the girl asked if Thomas remembered that the agreement was only for 2 sets, the man answered positively, but explained that he did not know the girl's preferences at all, so he took several to choose from. Then Tiffany asked why one piece of jewelry was presented separately, to which Thomas immediately replied that he wanted to present this particular piece of jewelry to the girl in any case and regardless of her further choice. Without waiting for the girl to decide to open the box, he helped her and told her that there was a pendant with a very rare diamond. It was very difficult to find and is an exact copy of Elizabeth's eye color. The girl was fascinated by the sophistication and beauty of the gemstone and could not take her eyes off it. And Thomas asked to try on this jewelry right now because while he was rushing here on a horse, he was only thinking about how the girl would look in it. Such openness and directness of the man greatly touched the girl. Taking off his gloves, the colonel will offer Elizabeth his help in trying on the jewelry. To which Tiffany silently agreed, turning her back to the man and putting her neck at his disposal. And when Thomas got down to business, the girl caught herself thinking that she was experiencing a strong feeling of embarrassment. And so the process of attaching the clasp began, where from the very beginning the man had some problems. Tiffany invited Thomas to give her the opportunity to wear the jewelry herself, to which she received a decisive refusal. Then she argued her position by saying that she would cope much faster if she simply turned the clasp towards her face. But this did not bring a positive result, where Thomas again said that he was quite capable of coping on his own. And so, after a few agonizing minutes, the colonel managed to do the clasp, after which he apologized to Elizabeth, also saying that he would train. While Tiffany was admiringly thinking about how determined this man was, Lori had already brought a mirror. But instead of looking at herself in the mirror, Tiffany suddenly asked the maid how this jewelry looked on her. The slightly embarrassed girl modestly replied that the decoration suited her mistress perfectly. And finally, Tiffany decided to verify this herself by paying attention to her reflection in the mirror. Having admired herself enough, the girl turned to Thomas and thanked him heartily for such a lovely gift. Taking advantage of Elizabeth's favor, the man invited her to try on a bracelet as well, where he emphasized that he would also help the girl put it on. There were no objections, and the girl began to expose her left wrist, which made the man horrified. The colonel's reaction seemed very strange to Tiffany, and she asked what was the matter. And Thomas drew her attention to the scar that remained on his hand after the attack on the train, to which the girl proudly stated that she was used to scratches, mentally recalling her injuries from falls in the baseball section. While putting on the bracelet, the colonel apologized for not being able to protect the girl on the train, to which Tiffany replied that the man was not at all to blame for this incident, after which Thomas said that now the girl is always under his complete protection. And only now, when Lori squealed, saying that it looked like a declaration of love, Tiffany remembered that she and the man were not alone in the room. Immediately, she began to quickly talk about how the man should really just take care of her until her wound finally heals and nothing more. After which the girl noticed what time it was, remembered the man's fatigue from the trip, and literally began to push him out of the room. But Thomas declared in surprise and swore that he felt great and was not tired at all. Then Tiffany had no choice but to start talking about how tired she was, which even made her feel slightly dizzy, which of course worked. And the polite man said that in this case the girl should rest, and he retired to his room. Suddenly, Tiffany had the idea that it would be somehow wrong to let Thomas go without thanking him in any way for his attention. After looking around, she called out to the man, stopping his movement and forcing him to turn around. After which, Tiffany asked to accept this modest gift from her, handing Thomas a scarf she had recently knitted. Such attention from the girl completely discouraged the colonel, who did not know what to say. He silently accepted the scarf from the girl's hands, and she thought that since she gave her scarf to the man, she should knit another one. And then she, Oliver, and Thomas will all wear the same scarves, which will look very cute. However, after a couple of minutes, Thomas's silence began to worry the girl. The thought even occurred to her that wearing scarves might not even be fashionable now. The colonel carefully ran his hand over the fibers of his new piece of clothing. And so, after some time from the moment he was given the gift, he asked the question whether he could really take this scarf for himself, to which he instantly received a positive answer from the girl. Expressing sincere gratitude, Thomas pressed the gift to his chest, which made clear its true meaning for the man. In response, Tiffany said that there was no need to thank her, since she was grateful to the man for the gifts and wished her a good evening. Already leaving the room, the colonel responded with Elizabeth's reciprocal wish. The man had long since left, but Tiffany still stood and looked in the direction where he was out of sight. The girl was distracted from this pleasant state by her young maid, who, pointing to the boxes with decorations, asked what to do with them now. Even without knowing what to do with all this goodness now, Tiffany told Lori to close the boxes and safely hide these jewelry, since today she was definitely not able to make a decision regarding their future fate. The next day, Tiffany showed all of Thomas's offerings to Oliver, who, after examining the valuables, asked if his aunt needed to choose one of them. To which the girl answered in the affirmative, also adding that even if she chooses one thing and tries to return the rest, then most likely Thomas will not accept anything back. The boy's next statement greatly surprised the girl, where Oliver said that he did not see any problem since his aunt could simply keep all this jewelry, after which he added that jewelry can be saved for all sorts of unforeseen situations for a rainy day. Of course, such a statement from the 10-year-old greatly surprised the girl, and besides, his train of thought was absolutely similar to Thomas's train of thought. After recovering a little, Tiffany said that she didn't see anything good in selling someone's gifts. Where, as an example, she gave a situation where she would decide to sell Oliver's gift, to which the boy said that, of course, it would be unpleasant for him. After which the girl, without addressing anyone, voiced that she was fully aware of the strangeness of her beliefs. Then, sitting down next to the boy, Tiffany said that Thomas spends so much money on her only because she is a relative of Oliver, and if she now accepts all his gifts, it will turn out that she will, sort of, sell the boy. To which the boy asked whether his aunt was speaking seriously now. Where Tiffany, of course, confirmed what she says in all seriousness, because greed has always ruined people. And the girl also noted to herself that after everything was over, she would have to look for her own path in this world. Therefore, it is not particularly worth getting used to a luxurious life, since when she returns home, she will no longer be able to cope with ordinary life. Oliver silently observed the thought process, the presence of which was revealed by the changing facial expressions of his aunt's face. And then there was a knock on the door, where a male voice announced that he had come to pick up the young master for his next lesson. Tiffany was a little sad that Oliver was leaving her again. The leaving child suddenly said that his aunt was now also part of the winter forest, and she should learn to live the life of an aristocrat. These words simply amazed the girl, who had never expected to hear such conclusions from a 10-year-old child. And before finally leaving the room, Oliver turned around and said that if the girl could not return to her old life, then she should start getting used to the new one. This sounded very significant and amazed Tiffany even more. She wanted to stop the boy, but he, closing the door, told the girl to think carefully about his words. The door closed, and Tiffany was left completely alone, completely unaware of what had just happened here. Lori walked along one of the long corridors of the estate. In her hands was a delivery with a set for the tea ceremony. Suddenly, she came across Oliver sadly trudged to his next lesson. He walked past the girl without saying a single word and paying absolutely no attention to her. Tiffany sat there, dismayed by the child's statements and wondering what he meant. Lori, who came up behind her, greatly frightened her with the question of whether the mistress was worried about the young master. To which Tiffany, turning around, replied that not at all, and the maid apologized for scaring the girl. While pouring the tea, Lori noticed that Oliver looked very much like his father, where she was surprised by the similarity every time she saw him. However, the girl's next remark was that the young gentleman's character was more like his uncle, Sir Thomas, cold and not particularly talkative. Whereas she heard about George that as a child he was very capricious and cried a lot. And then Lori noted that only Mrs. Oliver and Thomas showed warmth and care, which was surprising for Tiffany, and she expressed her doubts about this matter. But the maid objected, saying that the girl simply had not yet seen how cold both gentlemen could be. Tiffany thought that this could be thought about Thomas, but not about Oliver, a kind and good boy. The girl suggested that both gentlemen were simply timid, but such a guess did not greatly appeal to the overly astute maid. Changing the topic, Lori, having received permission from her mistress, asked if there was a romantic relationship between her and Thomas, which of course amused Tiffany a lot. However, without thinking for a long time, the girl replied that there was no relationship between her and the Duchess's son and never had been, since she was, first of all, the wife of his late brother. To which Lori replied that she thought about a personal relationship due to the fact that the colonel was very affectionate with Elizabeth. But Tiffany had her own opinion on this matter, where she believed that Thomas was simply fulfilling his duty to his nephew. She noted with sadness that even the Duke, who was completely aloof from everyone, treated the woman he loved with trepidation. Lori continued to talk about the reasons why she decided that there was something between her mistress and Thomas, completing her thought with the voiced guess that perhaps one of them was suffering from unrequited love. To which Tiffany said that Thomas simply has a very strong sense of responsibility and nothing more. Immediately, taking advantage of the opportunity, the girl asked her maid to explain this to everyone who might be mistaken about the existence of a relationship between her and the Duchess's son. And Lori, of course, said that she would help her mistress. Tiffany was already convinced that incorrect rumors had most likely already spread throughout the estate. At the same time, the girl also noted that Thomas could probably become just an ideal husband, given how he warmed up to her. She immediately thought that if she had known how everything would turn out, she would have come here not as Oliver's mother, but as an aunt, which would not have interfered with the development of her relationship with Thomas. Such an abundant process of thinking required fuel for the body, and Tiffany asked the maid to bring something for tea. Sometime later, Tiffany was walking around the estate when she heard the maids talking quietly. After listening, the girl realized that they were talking about what gifts the Duke's son gave her and how lucky she was. As it turned out, the situation was already out of control, and rumors were spreading throughout the estate at the speed of light. Deciding to get in on the rumors, Tiffany hid around the corner, where she had already heard that it was not about one or two, but about thousands of jewelry given to her. Then we talked about Elizabeth's status, where the maid said that she was not even an aristocrat in essence, despite the fact that her child looked like the late Mr. George, and therefore it was not clear why Sir Thomas treated her so well. Of course, Tiffany didn't really like the fact that some maids were discussing her so brazenly in their circles. And the conversation continued, where the girls now began to discuss the question of whether their master really fell in love with Elizabeth, or simply decided to play with her and leave her, having achieved what he needed. It was doubly unpleasant for the girl to listen to such speeches, and she came to the conclusion that she needed to leave so as not to overwhelm herself. But new gossip reached her ears, where it was discussed that Elizabeth probably seduced Mr. George with her body, since he would not sleep with just anyone. From these words, the girl stopped and froze in place. And behind her back, the maids continued to throw mud at Elizabeth, saying that the Duke and Duchess were blind, that Elizabeth would soon seize power here and that very dark times awaited them. But then, the maids saw that there was already quite a lot of time, and very reluctantly giving up gossip, just as reluctantly ran off to fulfill their duties. And Tiffany turned around, looking after the leaving gossips and not believing that she was really considered some kind of slutty person. That same day, the girl met with Thomas, where she told him that from today on, it was better for them to keep their distance. Of course, she could deal with the maids herself, but in this case, she would also be considered eavesdropping on conversations, which would completely destroy her reputation, so she decided to start from the very root of the problem, which was Thomas. The man did not understand at all what the girl was talking about and asked to name the reasons for such changes in her behavior. Tiffany began by thanking the man for the wonderful gifts and for the fact that with his help she quickly and easily became friends with members of his family. But then she added that his kindness towards her is not always perceived correctly by other people. Thomas still could not understand what Elizabeth was trying to tell him and asked what her statement meant. Tiffany tried to somehow explain, saying that they don't do so much for her brother's wife, that she is just a widow. But the stubborn man did not want to understand her, asking this time what other people she meant. Now the girl understood why the man could not understand her, and she quickly said that these people were maids. The amazed man asked how the maids' opinions could matter to Elizabeth. To which Tiffany very emotionally responded that all these girls work here, and therefore their opinion cannot be ignored. Hearing this, the colonel said that if it was so important for the girl, he would soon take care of everything. But Tiffany began to stop Thomas, saying that because of his interference, the maids would only talk more, to which the man again responded with a questioning look. Tiffany then tried to give an example by asking if he cared about what other soldiers said and did if it had anything to do with him. To which Thomas, with an absolutely calm face, replied that he didn't care at all, because there was always an army regulation for problem soldiers. Clutching her head, Tiffany concluded that she had not chosen a very good example. But before she could formulate a new thought, she suddenly heard a question from Thomas as to why she was so worried about some maids. And without waiting for an answer, the colonel also asked about the reason why Elizabeth constantly smiles at her maid and generally treats her in every possible way. The girl was angry that this man could not understand the simplest and most human things. She tried to explain that this is how people show each other attention and care, and when someone doesn't like someone, then they should worry about it. But Thomas could not understand this, asking why the girl cared that someone might not like her. Tiffany noted that they go in a vicious circle, and she does not know how to explain something to a person with different values. Perhaps the point was that the Duchess's love was unevenly distributed among the children, where, of course, it could seem from the outside that Thomas didn't care about this. But in the end, he grew into a person who doesn't care about anyone's opinion at all. The girl ended her thoughts with the thought that he cared about Oliver with such zeal, definitely not out of sympathy or selflessness. Although Thomas really loved the boy, the real reason was only his sense of responsibility. Realizing that it would definitely not be possible to change this man's worldview with a couple of sentences, the girl changed tactics, saying that given Thomas's opinion, she had nothing more to explain to him. But at the same time, she noted that if the colonel suddenly hated her, she would not remain indifferent to it. Hearing this, Thomas concluded that if Miss Elizabeth suddenly hated him, then he would be very worried about it too. It was a relief for the girl to see this impenetrable man gain understanding. She also noted to herself that according to the plot of the book, Thomas did not seem like some kind of antisocial person. He simply isolated himself from other people, and therefore their reciprocal words and actions were cruel. And if we consider the situation from this side, then the girl could only sympathize with this man. After a short pause, Thomas said that he now understood Elizabeth's concerns about the maid's conversations, which gave the girl hope for a successful outcome of the conversation and the situation as a whole. But the man's next proposal to simply fire all the maids and recruit new ones made the girl come to the conclusion that everything that was said to her had gone somewhere into emptiness. Literally clutching her head in her hands, Tiffany said that this is not at all what she means and what she sees as a solution to the problem. Then she straightened up sharply and categorically stated that changing all the maids was not a solution to the situation. The man tried to compare the current circumstances with everyday life in the army, where all personnel, on the contrary, are wary when a new commander appears and do not spread rumors about him. And Tiffany continued to insist that it would be very difficult for the girls if they suddenly lost their jobs, and she was ready to tolerate rumors, but there was no need to fire them. Here the man made the argument that these maids were making fun of Elizabeth, and if everything is left as it is, the situation will only get worse, and then the girl may change her mind about their dismissal. But the girl thought to herself that she definitely wouldn't decide people's fates just like that, with the snap of a finger. And the man suddenly began to voice his reasoning, saying that, in principle, all the maids have been working for a long time, and there is no big reason to change them for new ones. After which Thomas said that in this case one should proceed as usual, which caused misunderstanding in the girl. And Thomas explained, saying that they need to turn to that initial stage of their relationship, then they won't have to fire anyone. The girl was delighted at his words, thinking that this could really be a solution. But then, after analyzing the situation, I realized that this would not change the final result. Considering the conversation over, Thomas invited Elizabeth to have dinner together. Tiffany, of course, thought to herself that it would be better for the man to leave now and leave her alone, but within the bounds of decency she could not refuse. And when all the conversations and dinner were completed, Tiffany leaned back exhausted on the bench standing in the alley. But before she had time to enjoy a couple of minutes of silence, two maids appeared in the alley, whispering about something. Noticing the mistress sitting nearby, one of them interrupted the second story with a poke in the side, from which Tiffany, smiling, concluded that the conversation between the girls was about her. Meanwhile, the maids were deciding which of them would approach the mistress, while she pretended that she had not heard anything. And so, one of them, taking advantage of her friend's confusion, sharply pushed her forward, and the girl had no choice but to say hello and attract Elizabeth's attention. Taking a submissive pose, the maid suddenly said that on behalf of all the servants, she expressed gratitude to the mistress for her prudence. She explained her words by saying that she learned some details from the manager, where the Duchess heard a rumor that the maids were gossiping, and she demanded that they all be fired without letters of recommendation, so that none of them could work in any noble house again. And if they were kicked out of the winter forest, they would never find work, where the Duchess never changes her decisions. But they also learned from the manager that Madame Rowdy talked with the Duchess, and now they are no longer in danger of being fired, for which they are very grateful to her. Stunned by what was said, Tiffany sat unable to utter a word. And the maids continued, saying that they were very mistaken about Madame Elizabeth, since even after what had been said, she came to their defense. They then apologized for what they had said earlier, promised that it would not happen again, and said that all the other maids also expressed their gratitude and apologies. Not knowing how to respond to all this, Tiffany embarrassedly said that everything was fine and the girls had nothing to worry about. And the maids had already fallen to their knees in front of her, calling Elizabeth the best mistress and practically canonizing her. Tiffany thought that she was unworthy of such praise, where she, of course, tried to resolve the issue with the dismissal, but not in the manner in which the maids now presented it to her. The maids left, and Tiffany slowly moved along the corridors of the estate, thinking about why the manager gave them such information, where it definitely did not come from the Duchess, since the latter would definitely have warned her. The girl thought hard about who else could influence the manager, and the answer lay on the surface, where there was no one but Thomas to do it, and there was no need to do it. This conclusion was extremely surprising for Tiffany, because she never expected such actions from Thomas. With a feeling of great relief, the girl entered her chambers, where Lori was already waiting and greeting her, where, literally from the threshold, a young maid attacked the girl with a question about whether the rumor was true that her mistress saved the lives of the Colonel and Oliver, having been seriously wounded. This question shocked Tiffany even more than the sudden apologies from the other maids. And when asked where such information came from, Lori said that there was a rumor where Mr. Thomas's good attitude towards Elizabeth was connected precisely with the fact that she saved his life. With genuine admiration, the girl talked about how Elizabeth single-handedly stood up against an armed killer, calling her mistress an incredible woman. And Tiffany could only silently listen to the admiration of her maid and think about who was spreading such rumors. Tiffany remembered well the events on the train, where she simply tried to capture the killer alive by throwing a pepper shaker at him. But according to the rumors going around, she was a straight-up action hero. Tiffany told Lori that the story was embellished a little and told the girl how it really happened. But even the real story evoked a feeling of true admiration in the young girl, where she said that in such a situation she definitely would not have been able to behave so boldly, but would simply hide in a corner. Tiffany thanked Lori for her words and added that the misrepresentation still really embarrassed her. But Lori objected that there was nothing wrong with this because in general the story was not made up, and trying to correct the rumor would be useless. This is because the story has already spread throughout the estate, and there is hardly a worker who has not heard it. And Tiffany soon became convinced of this when, moving around the estate, she constantly saw admiring glances and heard cheers, becoming the center of attention in this house. And Thomas, who met her along the way, said that now no one would dare say anything bad about Elizabeth. However, the girl's reaction was very violent, where she said that saying that she saved a man in the war was too much. Since no rumors had been created about the war, Thomas could only wonder how rumors could evolve over time. Expressing gratitude on the one hand, Tiffany also asked that the colonel not do this again, since she did not want to be the center of attention. Here the man agreed, saying that there was no point in fanning the rumors even more. Having asked whether Elizabeth's worries were now over, he immediately received the answer that everything was all right now. The girl thought to herself that this man, who always didn't give a damn about others, showed such concern for her. This was very pleasant for her, and Tiffany decided to reconsider her attitude towards Thomas. But the quiet life did not last long, as Thomas soon presented Elizabeth with another gift, where the maids who witnessed this scene noted to themselves that this was how gratitude for salvation was manifested. He regularly came to the girl's room under the pretext that he needed to make sure that the girl was comfortable and did not need anything, which also caused a corresponding reaction from the maids. And Thomas also did not forget to invite Elizabeth for walks, where such excessive male attention was noted and condemned even by Oliver. Tiffany noted, not without pleasure, that as soon as the servant's wariness subsided, he began to visit her more often. One day, Tiffany had breakfast with Thomas. The thought that this man was showing some special care for her could not leave her head. Deciding to put an end to the guesswork, Tiffany asked Thomas for permission to ask a frank question. And having received this, the girl asked why the colonel treated her so well. Placing his mug on the table, the man replied that he had absolutely no idea what Elizabeth meant. Tiffany explained that he gives her gifts, settles troubles, invites her out, and sometimes says strange things. But when asked what kind of strange things he was saying, the girl did not answer exactly, saying that it would take a long time to explain. Then the man said that it was his noble duty to take care of Elizabeth's needs. Tiffany never expected to hear this in response. The girl thought that she should find out about Thomas's attitude towards other noble ladies in order to understand what he was talking about. Deciding that she herself had thought of something unnecessary since she did not know how a nobleman should treat women, the girl, blushing, said that she understood everything. Suddenly, from the outside, Tiffany seemed so funny and strange, having thought up who knows what about this man's attitude towards her, where she herself, without thinking about it, was expecting some kind of special attitude from Thomas towards her. And the colonel said that the girl was simply not yet accustomed to the manner of communication of nobles, but he sincerely hopes that very soon Elizabeth will become comfortable in his company. The girl only smiled in response, concluding that everything that could make sense to her turned out to be only part of noble etiquette. Tiffany also noted the positive side that she realized all this now, before she had completely fallen in love. She answered the man out loud that she would do everything possible to feel comfortable in his company. But looking at the colonel's face, Tiffany couldn't help but think that she was still very attracted to this man. The next night was difficult for the girl, where she couldn't bring herself not to think about Thomas. She sadly stated that she had fallen in love with him, but it was unlikely that the man would ever reciprocate her feelings. Behind these thoughts, Tiffany did not notice how the morning came, and she still did not sleep a wink. Lori had already entered the room with washing supplies, wishing the lady good morning. Some time later, as the maid helped with the clothes, Tiffany reflected that she would have a hard time ignoring her feelings for Thomas when interacting with him. She knows what it is, since in a past life she already had the experience of unrequited love. That's why the girl decided that she shouldn't suffer anymore and should try to let go of her feelings. The whole family had breakfast together today, where the Duke suddenly said that it was time to announce to everyone the existence of an heir, and Tiffany immediately noted that the turning point in this story had come. As part of this particular event, Oliver's existence will be officially announced to all relatives, where he will meet Daniel for the first time. However, the timing of the events did not coincide with the novel, since it seemed to the girl that another 3 months should pass before this event. But in this case, the acceleration of events probably took place due to the amazing successes of Oliver, where he was now indistinguishable from a hereditary nobleman. Meanwhile, Thomas suddenly said that it was too early to tell his relatives about the presence of an heir. To which the Duke replied that everyone was only talking about the fact that the heir's place was empty because something was wrong with Thomas. And the colonel casually remarked that father should not care at all what people say. However, plunging his fork forcefully into the piece of meat, the Duke said that he would not allow any such rumors to spread. Here, Tiffany intervened in the dialogue, asking if she should somehow prepare for this event. where perhaps she should study the official pedigree and find out more information about all relatives. And Thomas, without hesitation, said that since Elizabeth had nothing to do with all their relatives, it might not be worth wasting time studying the family tree. However, the Duke supported the girl's initiative, saying that one should be prepared for anything for safety reasons. Listening to this dialogue, Tiffany felt like she was in some kind of creepy movie. At this moment, the Duchess also inserted her comment, saying that Elizabeth should definitely familiarize herself with the family tree, after which the Duchess, turning to her son, said that she entrusted him with the responsibility of introducing Elizabeth to the family tree. This attitude, of course, was pleasant for the girl, since in fact she was recognized as a member of the family. Besides, if she is now busy with such a routine as studying relatives, then there will be no room left for thinking about Thomas. And so, after a very short period of time, the Colonel was already getting used to the role of a teacher, saying that they would now begin studying the family tree, which Tiffany did not oppose at all. After which, Thomas unfolded a huge sheet of paper in front of the girl, where their entire family tree was drawn. The girl began to look at the notes with interest, making notes along the way that the tree was not very branched, and the descendants had a very low survival rate, where many died very young. Meanwhile, Thomas began his lecture by saying that his father, the Duke of Winterwood, has a younger brother named Dorian Morris, who has a son, Daniel Morris, who has the highest status, after the status of Thomas himself. The Colonel also explained that Daniel is his closest blood relative, and the influence of this branch of their family is also quite great, where they dreamed of ruling the duchy, but their dreams were not destined to come true due to the appearance of Oliver, to whom they probably sent an assassin. Tiffany thought about the fact that all the key characters in the novel that she met are different from their originals, which may not bypass Daniel. However, she immediately realized that if he did send the killer after the little boy, then his character should not be much different. Tiffany decided that it was worth finding out about Daniel first and asked Thomas a question about his cousin's character, to which the man replied that his brother was one of those whom a girl should definitely not be interested in. The girl was interested in the fact that she just asked a question, from which Thomas suddenly became very gloomy, where it was quite obvious that he was not very pleased with Elizabeth's interest in Daniel. And she decided to continue this experiment, saying that wouldn't it be better to know more about the Colonel's brother? Which immediately provoked a corresponding reaction, where Thomas said that his brother was greedy, stupid, and should not be messed with at all. The girl was already beginning to be amused by the man's reaction to her attempts to find out more about Daniel. Having said that she would be prepared for the tricks of Brother Thomas, she immediately heard that it was better to try to avoid meeting him altogether. She listened with emotion as Thomas told her never to talk to Daniel. And when the Colonel finished his instructions, she cheerfully said that she would do so. Tiffany thought to herself that she could avoid him only of her own free will, but in the novel, Daniel was a frequent guest at evenings at which she would also need to be present. Thomas suggested continuing to study their family tree. This was followed by a story about the rise of his family to become dominant in the Winter Forest, where many centuries ago the Winter Forest was independent. But after the unification of families, the Richardson family began to rule here, which has remained unchanged for more than 2,000 years. The story did not arouse much interest in Tiffany, and she sat sadly at the table, resting her head on her hand. Hearing the midday clock strike, the girl noted that Oliver had been gone for a long time, since classes should have ended long ago, to which Thomas explained that most likely the Duke took the boy to the ancestral room, which he intended to do before his presentation. Surprised, Tiffany asked what was wrong with this ancestral room, and the Colonel explained that their ancient family heirloom is kept there, which is of incredible value and therefore is hidden from the eyes of strangers, and only the heirs get access to it in due time. Then the girl asked if she understood correctly that in this case the Colonel himself did not know where this room was. To which the Colonel responded positively, adding that all he knows is that the room exists and that there is a relic there. And when the girl asked what this relic was, Thomas replied that it was a wish-granting cup that could be used only once in a lifetime. It was news to Tiffany that such objects could exist in this world. The man immediately explained that he was created by ancient magic that no longer exists in their world. And now the next news about the presence of magic in this world shocked the girl for the second time in a minute. But remembering the contents of the novel, the girl noted that there was some mention of the transfer of magic within families. While Thomas was winding down the family tree, the girl asked if the Morrises were aiming to take over the Winter Woods just because of the cup. To which the Colonel replied that this is unlikely, because everyone considers it a myth, where he himself thought the same, until his father once told the truth, and his relatives lay claim to the diamond mines. This was quite reasonable, and Tiffany agreed with this conclusion, after which she asked if she had the right to know about the existence of the cup. And the Colonel replied that without any doubt, since she is now also part of their family. After thinking for a moment, Thomas said that most likely even his mother knew this, although he did not know for sure. Then the girl decided to ask one more question, where she was interested in whether it was possible that the Duke had made a wish. But Thomas had nothing to answer to this, since he did not know, and the Duke himself did not tell him anything about it. The next question was whether it was worth keeping the wish a secret, to which the man answered positively, but added that this was everyone's business, since in their family there were cases when the person who made the wish admitted that he had made it. Moving to the window, Thomas seriously thought about what his father's wish might be. And finally, he voiced that most likely it was a desire to get a contract for the construction of a railway, since in his youth he was obsessed with this idea. But Thomas finished by saying that this was just his purely personal assumption, since even on his deathbed the Duke will not tell about it, and the only one who can find out the truth is Oliver. In response to the girl's question, the Colonel explained that in the room there is a wish list of the heirs who have been in the room. Concerned, Tiffany asked why she was being taken to the room at such an early age, and Thomas replied that age does not matter here at all. Oliver has the right mindset, inherent in the air of the winter forest. The girl was terribly interested to know about the Duke's desire, but it would be strange to ask Oliver about it. Looking at the books lying next to her, Tiffany suddenly wondered if the original boy knew about the cup. And if he knew, then what could he wish for based on the plot of the book? In addition, the girl noted that if Oliver had not shown up, then Thomas would have been able to make a wish. And then she turned to the man again, asking if he had a desire that he would like to fulfill with all his soul. To which Thomas replied that he had no desire, and in general he did not believe in such things. The girl smiled back and said that the Colonel already gets everything he wants. Then Thomas corrected himself, saying that it would be more correct to say that his wish had already been fulfilled, and he did not need anything more specific. This was very unexpected for the girl, and she didn't even know how to react to what was said. That fulfilled wish was clearly in the man's personal space, where the girl had no access. Quite a long time had passed, where Tiffany, after studying the tree, managed to return to her place, but Oliver still did not appear. Suddenly the door to the room suddenly opened, and the girl turned around, and her gaze immediately saw the face of Oliver entering the room. Without any prelude, Tiffany asked the tired boy if he had been in the ancestors' room today, which amazed Oliver, who responded with a counter-question, asking how his aunt found out about it. Tiffany thought about whether to tell the truth, but if she didn't say something, the child would think that she was watching him. Having made up her mind, the girl lightheartedly replied that Thomas told her everything. However, inside she was already reproaching herself for mentioning her knowledge at all, being careful that rumors would not spread again. Deciding to change the subject, Tiffany said that the boy didn't look well and asked if he was okay. Oliver replied that he was fine, he just had a lot to think about. Then Tiffany said that he could always talk to her about all his problems. The boy was silent, and Tiffany once again concluded that he did not trust her at all. She thought hard about what she could say to the boy in order to somehow get him to talk. Turning to Oliver again, Tiffany said that most of his experiences are actually not as terrible as they might seem at first glance. Every situation has its own solution. If not what lies on the surface, then what can be dug deeper? The boy's question about what if a completely hopeless situation had developed made the girl think a lot. However, she quickly found herself and said that then the solution might be to switch to something else. She then asked what wish he would like to make when he became head of the duchy. And when the boy asked whether his aunt believed in this, Tiffany replied that yes, and as an option, you could wish for a lot of money. The girl immediately shared that she had already asked about Thomas's wish, but he said that he did not need anything, since his wish had already come true. Oliver was very surprised by his aunt's frankness, and Tiffany once again noted that the boy reacts strangely as soon as she mentions Thomas. Instead of answering the question, Oliver asked his aunt what she would like. Tiffany's first thought was to return to her body, but she quickly abandoned it, since her previous body might be dead, and returning to it would not bode well. Then the idea of a love spell for Thomas came to her, but the girl abandoned this thought, since this kind of thing, as a rule, does not lead to good. And suddenly she realized that now it would be appropriate, and at the same time help improve her relationship with the boy. She told Oliver, who was surprised to catch her every word, that she wanted him to become the head of this dukedom without unnecessary adventures. And to the boy's question, she replied that this was her sincere desire, and she hoped that he would be happy when he grew up. Suddenly turning away sharply, Oliver said that he was talking about the girl's desire and not about his future, and Tiffany was touched by how the boy was moved by her desire, although he tried with all his might to hide it. Rising abruptly and hiding his reddened face, Oliver said that he was going to his next class. The girl tried to call out to him, believing that there was nothing to be embarrassed about, but Oliver did not answer and left the room. And only now Tiffany realized that the guy never voiced his desire. But the girl was quite pleased that she was able to at least cheer up her nephew, deciding to ask about his desire another time. The day arrived to meet the other family members, where Lori had just finished putting on her mistress's makeup. Tiffany looked simply dazzling and was very excited about the upcoming events. Then Oliver looked into the room, asking if his aunt was ready to go out. But the girl said nothing in response, fixing her gaze on the boy. Where she sincerely admired how Oliver looked now, And to his question about why she was looking at him like that, Tiffany explained that now he looks like a real young master. To which Oliver gave the girl a counter compliment regarding her appearance, not forgetting to call her mom. And then he suggested that she definitely didn't choose the dress herself. Where, to the question of the embarrassed girl, the boy answered that she herself would definitely not have chosen anything good. Discouraged by such frankness, the girl said that her taste was not so bad, since she chose the jewelry herself. But Oliver objected to the girl, saying that firstly, Mr. Thomas gave it to him, and secondly, the jewelry is matched to the dress. From which he concludes that he almost misspoke when he started speaking for his aunt, but corrected himself in time, saying for his mother, it was the same person who picked it out. But he ended his speech by saying that, in any case, this dress suits the girl. And Tiffany was struck by the facial expressions of Oliver, where perhaps for the first time in all time, she saw a smile on his face. Then there was a knock on the door, and the girl allowed me to enter, saying that she was ready. It was the colonel who came, resplendent in his military uniform and with orders for military merit on his chest. Tiffany couldn't contain her admiration, saying that the military uniform suited Thomas very well. And then she drew the man's attention to herself, asking what she looked like, because it would not be very good to appear in front of the family as a hillbilly. And only Thomas began to say that the girl looked simply incredibly beautiful. How his speech was immediately interrupted by Oliver, expressing words of indignation at his aunt, where he noted that he had already spoken about his aunt's beautiful appearance and did not understand why she did not believe him. To which Tiffany, in order to smooth the situation over, thanked the boy for his attention. And so Thomas, holding out his hand, suggested starting the journey to the reception hall. Tiffany put her hand in the man's hand and the whole trio began to move. Being next to Thomas, the girl caught herself thinking that she felt the aroma of winter near this man. The colonel looked so cold and imperturbable. As they walked, Thomas noted that the girl had chosen to wear his gift, hinting at the decoration. Tiffany nodded in response, but then asked whether the Duchess would be offended by this, which surprised the man, who immediately asked a counter-question about what his mother might be offended by. And the girl explained, saying that the reason for the offense could well be the fact that she did not wear her gift. But the colonel reassured Elizabeth, saying that her mother would definitely not be offended by such a trifle, and would not even notice it. But Tiffany continued to be tormented by doubts, where she combined her first appearance in public, and the fact that the Duchess was the first to give the gift. And then it became unclear to the man why the girl, in this case, decided to wear his gift. Looking at Thomas with wide eyes, Tiffany thought that she only had the Duchess's gift and Thomas's gift at her disposal. And the reason for her choice was that it was a gift from a man for whom she had the warmest feelings. Out loud, the girl said that this decoration simply suited her outfit better. And Thomas immediately confirmed that the girl really suits today's outfit. Then the man noticed that the girl's hands were very cold and suggested that she was cold because of her very thin clothes. But Tiffany denied this, explaining that it was all more out of excitement than from cold. Thomas was very surprised by what the girl was going through, and the girl again had to explain that everyone had come to look at her and Oliver, and if she made a mistake, she would immediately be used against them. And so they approached the door to the reception hall. And a second later, the company was already standing inside a huge room, where, from all sides, the not very pleased glances of the arriving relatives immediately rushed towards them. Tiffany introduced herself first, calling herself Elizabeth Rowdy and saying she was very pleased to meet you. After which, she brought the boy forward and introduced him as Oliver, her son, expressing her hopes for the family's favor. But after watching the reaction of those gathered, Tiffany fully realized that she shouldn't expect a particularly warm welcome. An elderly woman was the first to speak, saying that this was the first time she had heard such a surname and suggesting that the girl was from the south. To which Tiffany said that she was indeed from one of the southern villages, which led the old woman to amazement, where she noted that the Rowdy family did not even have their own possessions. And then whispers were heard from all sides, where Elizabeth was called a commoner, that the girl herself stood and listened with dignity, since if she had not appeared at all, then she would have been considered an arrogant commoner. Of course, she understood that these people would not go deeper in their judgments but would appeal to what was on the surface. Immediately among the crowd, Tiffany was able to identify those who apparently started all these discussions and would only observe from the sidelines, drawing their own conclusions. Meanwhile, quiet conversations continued, where the nobility already said that the birth of an heir does not mean that she should be accepted into the family. The girl thought first of all about Oliver, cursing everyone present for not even wanting to try to understand the fear this child is now experiencing. Carried away by her thoughts, Tiffany did not notice how she automatically grabbed Oliver's hand, which surprised him. And then Thomas intervened, saying that although Elizabeth was a commoner, nevertheless, her family was not poor. He said that although they do not have their own territories, they have a successful trading business. And then, pointing to the same old lady who started all this, Thomas said that Elizabeth allocated money for the carriage for this relative, because the old lady had a difficult financial situation. Immediately in response, complaints began to pour in that the colonel was behaving too rudely and obscenely. And Thomas, putting on a simple-minded face, just as innocently asked why everyone was so alarmed, because he was absolutely right. Tiffany, who stood on the sidelines and watched the development of events, mentally thanked the defender. Here, one of those present accused Thomas of lack of manners and asked why he suddenly decided to speak. To which the colonel said that he has every right to speak whenever he pleases, and even more so if his interlocutors are relatives. And then, in the coldest tone, he called the man's words absurd and said that they shouldn't even dare say such things to him. From which all of Thomas's opponents suddenly immediately became silent. After which the man said that a person does not have to be a follower of the main branch in order to be considered an aristocrat, and the people not gathered here should challenge the decision of his family. Those around him silently listened to what the colonel was saying, and no one dared to say a word in response. Tiffany was very surprised that as soon as Thomas raised his voice a little, this entire horde of aristocrats immediately fell silent. At the same time, the girl noted that looking at what was happening, one can conclude that such a concept as respect for elders is definitely not in use here. Even after 2,000 years, the Richardson family remains dominant in the winter forest. Meanwhile, Thomas continued to speak, where he compared the words of those present with the whistle of the wind and said that if someone is not happy with something here, they can leave. And in the end, the colonel said that no one should forget in whose possessions it is now, and none of those gathered said a single word in response. But suddenly one of the guests began to clap his hands and said that they should stop there. He turned to that elderly woman, calling her aunt and saying that he fully understood that she simply cared about the fate of the winter forest. And Tiffany thought to herself that this is the only blood relative who can afford to speak out in this situation. None other than the heir of the Morris family, the son of the Duke's brother, Daniel. Shifting his attention from his aunt to his brother, Daniel told Thomas not to be so strict, to which the colonel replied that he was not going to ignore the attacks on his family. Tiffany stood and looked at two relatives who at the same time were irreconcilable enemies. And at that very moment, the Duke and Duchess entered the hall, greeting those gathered. Thanking everyone for coming, the Duke said that today the next heir to the Winterwood Duchy would be announced. Whereupon he turned and bade Oliver come to him, which the boy did at once. And the Duke, taking the boy by the shoulder, introduced him to the guests, saying that this was George's son and direct heir. Making a slight bow, the boy introduced himself, calling himself Oliver Rowdy from the southern village, and adding that apparently he had no need to thank the assembled people for this visit, because he thought that they had come to see him, but instead they allowed themselves to insult his own mother, whose last name he bears. Tiffany was simply horrified when she heard what Oliver said to everyone in the room. But the boy did not stop, saying that his soon-becoming Richardson did not mean that he would cease to be rowdy, and his relatives should think about it before saying anything. After this, indignant exclamations were heard from all sides, where every now and then the boy was called a little scoundrel. Daniel also added his comment saying that Oliver had only recently become part of the family. This added fuel to the fire, as they immediately supported him, shouting to Oliver not to dare act as if he had already become a successor. Tiffany, having heard such sayings, immediately became indignant, saying that it was unacceptable to behave this way towards a child. And then the Duke himself intervened in the development of the situation. With his loud and firm voice, he called out to the man who had just reproached Oliver for his unworthy behavior. The Duke said that the man was saying strange things because Oliver was already the heir to the dukedom and had every right to speak out in his own house. The man had nothing to say to this, and looking down remained silent. Having finished with one malcontent, the Duke turned his attention to another, more sophisticated young man, where he told Daniel not to think of shifting any burden of responsibility onto Oliver, since royal blood flows in his veins. Clenching his fists from impotence and anger, Daniel said that he completely understood the Duke. But, having asked permission and received it, he asked the question of when the family intended to include Oliver in the family tree. After all, as the Duke said, royal blood flows in his veins, which he received from the last heir, his father George, and therefore he needs to change his last name and appear before the royal family. To which the Duke replied that all these events were already planned immediately after their meeting today. Hearing this, Daniel suddenly apologized for his careless words and the disrespect he expressed towards the Duke, which made Tiffany wary. Because including Oliver in the family tree is tantamount to full recognition of his rights as heir, which Daniel himself has just pushed the Duke to do. But according to the plot of the novel, this man should not be at all happy with this outcome, let alone provoke it himself. Meanwhile, noticing the girl's gaze on himself, Daniel gave her the most good-natured smile, and Tiffany had no choice but to smile back, while continuing to think that such a significant part of this story suddenly went completely against the book. Even in such a tense atmosphere, the banquet continued, where the ladies' guests, of course, began to try to somehow hook Elizabeth, saying that it was completely impossible to imagine how a girl lived in a village with such an appearance where men would probably pass her by. They didn't give it. But Tiffany thought to herself that Elizabeth's life should not concern these ladies at all. But the attacks continued, where another guest asked if they looked askance at a single woman raising a child, which could lead to misunderstandings. Tiffany was still silent when Thomas suddenly appeared next to her. Leaning towards the girl, he asked if she needed any help in putting all these arrogant people in their place. However, already knowing the man's methods, Tiffany quickly said that there was no need to do anything, while slapping Thomas on the leg. She immediately came to her senses and looked with horror at the man's reaction, thinking that she had crossed all possible boundaries. Here the Duchess, who was standing nearby, coughed violently, and the Duke immediately escorted Evelyn from her chambers for rest and recuperation. Tiffany noted the woman's suddenly unhealthy state. This was an excellent opportunity to leave this inhospitable place, where Tiffany apologized and referred to the fact that Oliver was still small and tired quickly. Leaving with the boy, the girl mentally apologized for using him as an excuse, but it was impossible for her to leave alone, as this would have a bad effect on their common reputation. But suddenly one of the women said that if the child is tired, then you just need to ask the nanny to take him away, and you don't have to walk on your own. To which Tiffany replied that she should be next to the boy when he falls asleep. But now, another woman said that there was no need to rush around with the child herself, and also offered to call a nanny, if, of course, they had one, which was a clear attempt at insult. And the women standing nearby had already begun to chuckle quietly. And the evil woman continued to be sarcastic, saying that apparently Miss Rowdy was not aware that in aristocratic families, nannies took care of children. But suddenly, a lady in a blue dress standing in the general circle of ladies said that there were exceptions to the rules, where the Duchess personally took care of Oliver's father, which immediately changed the expression on the faces of the women standing nearby, who immediately began to say that it was completely unthinkable to remember that the Duchess was a nanny. Tiffany, looking at these strange women, could not understand what was wrong with them. Although the Duchess and her husband left, their son Thomas still remained in the hall. Having forcefully placed the glass on the table so that its contents partially ended up on the tablecloth, the girl said that she was grateful to all the participants in the conversation for their advice. But she immediately added that in the matter of raising Oliver, she still intends to be guided by the Duchess's advice, and not by those that the ladies have just voiced, where they can discuss their opinion directly with Evelyn. It was an unconditional victory because not another word was spoken in response, and of course none of them would dare speak to the Duchess in person. Having said goodbye, Tiffany, and with her Thomas and Oliver, gracefully left the reception hall. Already entering her chambers, Tiffany thanked Thomas for his participation today. But before she had time to say goodbye to him and close the door, Thomas suddenly called out to the girl, where the man was interested in why Elizabeth just listened silently to what these shameless women were saying today. Tiffany did not quite understand what the colonel meant when he asked to clarify the question, to which Thomas directly asked why the girl allowed them to throw mud at her, where before that she was very worried about some ridiculous and innocent rumors spread by the maids. And the girl, without being confused, remembered the colonel's words that he didn't care at all about other people's opinions, which was not the case in this situation. Where Tiffany found it simply amazing was that Thomas was hurt by someone else's opinion of her. This answer completely discouraged the colonel. After thinking a little, he said that he understood everything, and Elizabeth was absolutely right here. And then the man added that he discovers a strange phenomenon where someone else's opinion begins to worry him when it concerns Elizabeth, which could not leave the girl indifferent to such words. And Thomas continued, saying that in this case he simply could not help but intervene in the situation. With trembling and a sinking heart, Tiffany listened to these girls' pleasant words for people. Thomas, looking at Elizabeth's confused face, said that it was time for him to leave, and she needed a good rest. And Tiffany looked for a long time after the leaving man, who was able to surprise her today. Thoughts about what Thomas told her before leaving did not leave the girl even at night. Trying to calm down, Tiffany closed her eyes and tried to fall asleep. But then the thought entered her head that the colonel could come to her defense solely out of compassion. This option, of course, did not make the girl very happy, causing a feeling of anger rather than joy. Turning sharply on her side, Tiffany thought that this man constantly does only what he pleases. One of the variants of such cold and self-centered behavior, the girl found Thomas's military character, from which she came to the conclusion that this man was not capable of falling in love at all. Changing her position once again, Tiffany thought that Thomas was unlikely to go on a date, since everyone thought that he was against marriage. With sadness, Tiffany thought that if she could never reveal her feelings to Thomas, would she at least be able to be somewhere near him, which was basically possible as Oliver's mother. Having finished this internal monologue, the girl finally felt that she really wanted to sleep and soon fell into a deep sleep. Oliver, with the most serious expression on his face, told his aunt that she should never even come close to Daniel Morris, so that she never listens to anything that this man says and in every possible way avoids any communication with him. To which Tiffany calmly replied that she understood the boy, and she had no reason to get involved with this person. Of course, Oliver's performance and the banquet on this occasion had long since ended, but many relatives were still visiting the estate. But at the same time, Tiffany thought that, on the other hand, it would be nice to know what the villain Daniel was up to, which could help protect both Oliver and herself. Suddenly, Laurie looked into the room and in her usual cheerful manner said that the Duchess was inviting her mistress to dine together. Cautiously peeking over the back of the chair, Tiffany asked the maid if other family members would be present at dinner, to which Laurie immediately answered in the negative, after which the girl immediately jumped up and said that in this case she was ready to move out immediately, surprising her nephew with her agility. Moving along the corridors of the estate, Tiffany was only thinking about how to avoid meeting any of the visitors, since she had had enough of the company at the banquet. But suddenly in the distance, she saw a man's silhouette. Approaching a little closer, Tiffany recognized the one who was standing and looking out the window as if waiting for her. It was Daniel Morris who greeted Miss Rowdy cordially. Since Tiffany herself had recently been thinking about meeting this man, the current situation was only to her advantage, and she greeted the man in return. When asked if she remembered him, Tiffany said that she could not forget the Duke's nephew. Clearly pleased with the well-developed conversation, Daniel invited Elizabeth to have a cup of tea together, to which Tiffany replied that she could not provide a man with such pleasure, since she had already received an invitation from the Duchess. And the Duke's nephew in response noted that apparently the Duchess really appreciates the girl, since she even invited her to dinner. But Tiffany skillfully parried this attack, saying that the Duchess was simply trying to take care of a person who was not related by blood to their family. But Daniel said that this only confirmed what he had said, since everyone knew Evelyn's habit of dining alone. And while the girl was thinking about whether this man had just publicly ridiculed the Duchess's habits, Daniel invited Elizabeth to drink tea together tomorrow. To which the girl said that she appreciated his offer, and in this case invited the man to her place, which he was incredibly happy about. Saying goodbye until tomorrow, Tiffany continued on her way. The Duke's nephew did the same, folding his hands behind his back and heading in the direction opposite to where the girl was heading. And Tiffany, moving on, thought that she would not simply allow herself to be swallowed by this wolf in sheep's clothing. Daniel sat with his head in his hand and annoyedly asked Miss Rowdy what she had done, where he believed that the girl would be useful to him, but in reality, everything turned out completely differently, and his plan failed. But Tiffany, who had nothing to lose, proudly declared that the man deserved all his suffering, after which the Duke's nephew said that there was nothing more to talk about and ordered to get rid of Elizabeth. Where at the same moment, one of Daniel's henchmen jumped up to her and struck the girl with a powerful blow with his hand. And then Tiffany literally jumped up in her bed. Shedding cold sweat and feeling trembling all over her body, the girl thought that she had just seen the very part of the story that could await her in the future. Behind these gloomy thoughts, Tiffany was caught by the thin voice of Laurie, who, being outside the door, said that it was time to get up. Still not recovering from the nightmare, Tiffany concluded that she didn't like all of this at all. At the appointed hour, Daniel appeared in Tiffany's chambers with a bouquet of flowers and warmly greeted the girl, also saying that these flowers could not compare with the girl's beauty. Tiffany thanked the man, thinking to herself that he was just a hypocrite. When the girl accepted the bouquet, he suddenly touched the fingers of her hand with a gentle movement, which caused the girl to have a far from pleasant reaction. Handing the bouquet to the maid and smiling sweetly at the guest, Tiffany at the same time mentally gave the man not the most flattering words. Daniel started the conversation by saying that it must be hard for the girl to get used to this place, since the Richardsons are very cold people. To which Tiffany said that even if this is so, it's not in relation to her. But the man stuck to his line, declaring that for the first time he saw not only the Duchess, but also Thomas, so caring. And the girl said in a carefree voice that it was all due to a great sense of responsibility. Taking a mug of tea, Daniel suddenly said that apparently Elizabeth had a fairly good relationship with George, to which the girl immediately expressed a lack of understanding of the reason why this statement was made. But Daniel explained that he thought that the girl was experiencing unpleasant feelings due to the fact that he abandoned her, which is not visible. And resourceful Tiffany coldly said that it only seemed so from the outside. And immediately the man had to apologize for such discourtesy towards the girl's feelings. Tiffany noted, not without pleasure, that in her life she had already met many vile people like the man sitting opposite her, and she had long ago learned how to conduct a dialogue with them. Suddenly, Daniel said that it had obviously been difficult for the girl to raise a child alone, and if she suddenly needed help, he was always at her service. To which the girl replied that she was very grateful for such attention, thinking to herself that she would never have thought to contact him. And then Tiffany made up her mind and asked whether the Duke's nephew really did not like the Richardson family. To which Daniel, to the girl's surprise, responded positively, saying that the reason for this was their arrogance. Where he paid special attention to Thomas, saying that even if he takes care of Elizabeth, he will miss a lot, which seemed to the girl a ridiculous and unworthy statement for a man. Deciding to change the topic of conversation, Tiffany noted Daniel's high popularity and asked if he was married. To which the man responded negatively, and the girl expressed her surprise at this circumstance. After which, she voiced her assumption that in the North everyone gets married late, since Thomas is also not married yet. But Daniel answered only for himself, saying that he simply had not yet met the right person. Tiffany noted that given the age of both this man and Thomas, for some reason no one in the duchy insists that such enviable candidates remain alone for a long time. And then the girl was struck by the idea that, without looking for a wife, Daniel was simply aiming to become an heir, where one of the conditions was that he must be connected with the royal family. And if this is the case, then this man is truly obsessed with his idea. While Tiffany was thinking, Daniel suddenly noticed that Elizabeth pronounced the name Thomas with great feeling. And then it dawned on the girl that when she mentioned the colonel, she was not using his title at all. However, Tiffany quickly found her way, saying that she was a commoner and it was common for her to make such mistakes. And the man, taking the chance, asked whether he understood correctly in this case that there was nothing between Elizabeth and Thomas. To which the girl said that she did not quite understand what was meant by such a question. After which she said that she was not accepted into the family properly, and in general she was not sure that she could call someone family here. And feigning despair, Tiffany shouted that everyone here only reproaches her for the fact that she was simply lucky to meet the right person on her way. As expected, Daniel became very upset about the girl's condition and apologized for raising the topic. Tiffany rightly believed that the maids around them were surprised by her unusual behavior, but it was necessary. And indeed, Lori and her assistant looked at each other in bewilderment, completely not understanding what was happening here now. But suddenly Daniel knelt in front of Tiffany and said warningly that his words might not sound right now, but he had to say them. Where, looking up, the man declared that he fell in love with Elizabeth at first sight. The girl never expected to hear this. But the new admirer did not stop there, continuing with an offer to the girl to start an official relationship with him. It was so unexpected that even the maids standing nearby screamed. In Tiffany's head, only one thought flashed through her mind: what this abnormal man was talking about. Meanwhile, the onslaught continued, where Daniel now said that he had already thought about the wedding, but thought that everything would definitely shock the girl in one day. Finally, having gathered herself, Tiffany asked the Duke's nephew whether in the North it was really customary to declare love on the first day of acquaintance. To which Daniel replied that he personally prefers to act immediately if he liked the girl. Only one word now appeared in the girl's head regarding the mental abilities of this man, and that word was madman. Having already thoroughly recovered from the loud statements, Tiffany invited the man to get to his feet first, also affirmatively saying that he came here with the understanding that she was in a relationship with George and had a son from him. To which Daniel calmly replied that he didn't see any problem in this, since he was completely different from Thomas with his morals. Such statements discouraged the girl. And then she realized that if Daniel married Elizabeth, he would lose the opportunity to manage the construction of railways, since he would not be associated with the royal family. But at that very moment, the girl remembered that today's agreement was valid for 50 years and was concluded 35 years ago, during the wedding of the Duke and Princess Mary. This means that it will be valid for another 15 years and will end when Daniel is only 40 years old. In this case, he can get rid of Oliver not now, but in 15 years, taking his place. And while the girl was driving all these thoughts through herself, the man said that he understood Elizabeth's worries about her son. And he assured her that when he became close enough to her, he would raise Oliver as his own son, becoming a reliable support and protection for him. These words fully confirmed the girl's recent guesses. It was in this that she found the meaning of Daniel's actions in the form of a declaration of love. And this was also the meaning of his raising the question of including Oliver in the family tree. After all, before seducing Elizabeth, he needs to do everything to ensure that Oliver ends up in the family tree as soon as possible, so that he can subsequently claim a place in it. Where in this way he will simply put Oliver in chains first, and through him, Elizabeth. This prospect terrified the girl. Tiffany began to talk to the man, addressing him as Sir Morris, when he immediately interrupted her, saying that she could simply address her as Daniel. But the girl repeated the appeal she had chosen, saying that the man's recognition burdened her, since she invited him solely for the motive of establishing relations between the family branches. But Daniel was not going to back down, asking the girl to simply consider his candidacy, where he finds himself quite an attractive man. With indignation, Tiffany noted the excellent game of emotions that this villain staged in front of her. And Daniel continued, saying that Elizabeth needs reliable support in the form of a solid male shoulder, which Tiffany countered by stating that there is Thomas in the house who will always help her. Hearing this, Daniel said that in the eyes of an inexperienced girl, the colonel can and does look like a hero, but in fact, by nature, this person is very cold, indifferent to everyone, and not trustworthy. Tiffany mentally agreed that Thomas was indeed cold in character, but this cold-blooded man protected Oliver at the cost of his life. But then, quite unexpectedly, Daniel grabbed the girl's hand. Tiffany, frightened, screamed for the man not to touch her. And the assertive, impudent man, without listening to the girl, said that they should narrow the gap between them step by step. Tiffany tried in vain to pull her hand out of Daniel's strong grip, where the maid standing next to her intervened in this scuffle, shouting that the master was only complicating everything with his actions. And at the moment of peak intensity of passions, the door to the room suddenly opened sharply. Tiffany turned around in fear. Thomas stood in front of her, with Lori hiding behind him. The colonel looked closely at how the man grabbed and held the woman, where the tension in the hands of the participants in the action was visible to the naked eye. Saying that he had now witnessed a pathetic act, Thomas began to move towards Daniel, grabbing the poker that was standing by the fireplace along the way. In one sharp movement, he struck the hand of the failed admirer with an iron, which, of course, forced the latter to let go of the girl's hand. With a cry of pain, Daniel crouched down and grabbed his wounded arm, after which the colonel invited the girl to go with her, and the victim sat on the floor and reproached his brother for lacking manners and disturbing the tea party. To which Thomas immediately replied that it was not for Daniel, who so unceremoniously grabbed girls, to tell him about manners. And he added that it was only a warning, where from now on his brother should not approach Elizabeth, where he won't be able to use her in his dirty plans and with such a meager mind. Tiffany stood quietly behind her defender, not interfering in the brothers' conversation. Meanwhile, Daniel noted that Thomas was behaving somehow unusually, where before he was neither seen nor heard at all. But the colonel responded with the same arguments, adding that he immediately understood what Daniel was hiding under the pretext of expressing feelings. However, the stubborn man did not give up his position, shouting that he sincerely fell in love with Miss Rowdy. To which Thomas coldly replied that he did not care, and this did not cancel his warnings, where the man repeated his main requirement not to approach Elizabeth again. At the same time, he noted that if his brother has any objections, then he is ready to accept his challenge to a duel at any time. Here, Daniel had nothing to say, since in a power confrontation he had no chance against his brother. But as he rose to his feet, he noted that Thomas looked at Elizabeth the same way the Duke looked at the Duchess. After which Daniel said that accusing him of conspiracy, the colonel himself was also not without sin. To which Thomas did not answer anything, motioning with his head to suggest that his opponent give an example. But this did not happen, where Daniel suddenly turned to Elizabeth and said that he was forced to leave her in the current situation. And Tiffany answered him, wishing him good luck, where she could not even observe the interlocutor's face because of Thomas's broad back. While leaving, Daniel announced to the girl that his offer remains valid, and if she changes her mind, he is always ready to accept her, which both Tiffany and Thomas listened to without any comments in response. When the door closed behind Daniel, Tiffany, exhausted from nervous tension, sank into a chair. Her savior took an empty seat at the table where new cutlery was immediately placed for him. The girl noted with a touch of humor how unexpectedly her tea party partner had changed. And then Tiffany heard quiet sobs behind her. The girl didn't even have time to realize what was happening when Lori rushed to her feet with an apology. Stunned by this behavior of the maid, Tiffany asked her what happened. To which Lori replied, wiping away tears, that Mr. Thomas asked her to contact him in case the lady ever met Mr. Daniel. After hearing this, Tiffany cast a sidelong glance towards the colonel. And the maid continued, saying about her decision not to report every little detail and therefore remained silent about yesterday's meeting. And having concluded that her inaction led to today's results, Lori began to burst into tears again, asking for forgiveness from her mistress. Tiffany didn't know how to calm her maid down because she believed that there was nothing to cry about at all. And then it dawned on the girl that most likely Lori was afraid of Thomas's reaction to such inaction, which was the reason for her behavior. And then she turned to Thomas with a request not to kick this maid out of work, since everything that happened was not her fault, but the fault of Elizabeth herself, who showed stubbornness. To which the colonel responded in surprise that he had no intention of expelling anyone, where Tiffany, experiencing something like rage, immediately remembered how the man spoke out about changing all the servants because of just rumors, but now she doesn't even think about kicking out the one who did not comply with his direct order. Having received the man's answer, Tiffany told the maid that she had heard everything herself and everything was fine. And Thomas has already gone on the offensive, asking about what his unlucky cousin proposed to Elizabeth. But Tiffany was in no hurry to talk about everything that happened here, simply saying that nothing special was offered. To which the colonel insistently said that since it was nothing special, it would not be difficult to tell about it. Having lowered her eyes, the girl, feeling slightly embarrassed, said that Daniel had suggested that she start a romantic relationship, and Thomas immediately voiced his confidence that there was more to the proposal. And Tiffany said that there was also a proposal to marry him, and now the colonel is probably disappointed in her. Thomas did not understand this statement and asked why he should suddenly be disappointed, where Tiffany explained that she went against his advice to stay away from Daniel by inviting him over for tea. But the man said that this is not a reason for him to be disappointed in her. But in these words of Thomas, Tiffany saw her own meaning, suggesting that he was simply not interested in her as a woman. And the colonel expressed his lack of understanding of Elizabeth's concerns, because he considered Daniel to be to blame for coming to her. Tiffany thanked Thomas for these words. The next question regarding what the answer to Daniel's proposal was discouraged the girl. But when her mind digested the question, Tiffany immediately shouted that, of course, she immediately refused him dates even before Thomas appeared. And then she added that she also refused Daniel's marriage proposal. From what he heard, the Colonel's face changed dramatically. The wrinkles straightened out, and he said that the girl had made absolutely the right decisions. Tiffany was glad that this interrogation was finally over. But it was not to be, because before the girl had time to catch her breath, a new question followed from the man, where the subject of his interest was whether the girl refused because Daniel proposed or because she does not plan to get married at all. Having put on a serious face and collected herself, Tiffany addressed the man by name. Then she said that she was here solely because of Oliver. Saying that this was not a problem, Thomas repeated his question as to whether Elizabeth intended to get married. Turning away, Tiffany asked what the man's interest was in this matter, and whether he was about to propose, to which Thomas sarcastically asked about the girl's desire to enter into an arranged marriage. However, the girl, who did not share the humor, said that she meant what the man said when they first met. But suddenly, very nervous, Tiffany shouted at Thomas to forget everything she just said and that she didn't want to marry anyone. After which the man said very upset that he understood the girl's intentions. It didn't escape Tiffany's notice that Thomas became noticeably sad after her words. The girl suddenly remembered all the warnings that were heard from Thomas and Oliver, and she concluded that the appearance of the Colonel was very opportune. Otherwise, it is unknown how all this could have ended. Looking at the confused man, Tiffany was glad that Thomas was not angry with her at all, but she mentally imagined what Oliver's reaction to these events might be. And taking a sip, she decided that she should try not to catch his eye. Of course, the idea of not being seen by the boy was at least naive, considering that they lived in the same house. And now Oliver was shouting that he was warning his aunt that Daniel should be avoided. Tiffany tried to justify herself, saying that they met by chance and it was impossible to just say no in the adult world, to which the boy said that he had not been a child for a long time and such excuses would definitely not work on him. After which the boy once again strictly instructed his aunt not to start communicating with a person like Daniel. Tiffany tried to say that this man was their relative after all, but the boy's position was unshakable, where he said that he did not care who Daniel was, since he considered him a creature. And now it was the girl's turn to be indignant as to where the boy got such words, to which he immediately replied that it didn't matter now. Clutching his head, Oliver insisted that it was the height of baseness to try to propose to his aunt. Seeing the child's extremely agitated state, Tiffany began to tell him to calm down. And Oliver once again shouted that his aunt should not dare to meet with Daniel now, where he noted that if he was smart enough to make an offer at the first meeting, then it is unknown what will happen at the second. For some reason, Tiffany thought that there was just an offer to date with the prospect of marriage, but rumors again turned everything upside down. Trying to somehow calm the boy down, the girl offered to bring him his favorite confectionery delicacy. Daniel, after what happened, almost immediately left the estate, where Tiffany was very happy about it. Watching the departing carriages, the girl concluded that the rest of her relatives would leave one of these days and the estate would finally become quiet. Suddenly, the mistress's attention was attracted by Laurie approaching from behind, pointing to the woman standing at the entrance. The maid said that one of Oliver's teachers wanted to talk to the mistress. Tiffany asked with concern what the reason for this visit was, to which the woman said that she was very sorry to say this, but Oliver was missing classes. And even when he is present in the class, his thoughts are somewhere very far away. The woman also replied that in general, there were no complaints about the studies, but these absenteeism and the boy's attitude still complicate the situation. Tiffany wearily promised the woman to have an educational conversation with Oliver, and soon the girl was asking the boy why he began to behave this way, to which Oliver stated that he no longer wanted to attend classes and would study on his own. And in response to Tiffany's attempts to reason with him, the boy said that he did not want to waste his time on something meaningless, since his thoughts were already in complete confusion. However, the girl emotionally argued that Oliver could not just quit studying. She asked him to at least explain the reason so that it could be voiced to the teachers, since it would be wrong to leave without explaining anything. To which the child replied that teachers are simply hired personnel who do not need to explain anything. Then Tiffany asked the boy to at least say why he was so worried, but the answer was silence. Oliver definitely didn't want to share his experiences. And Tiffany noted to herself that at this age, all children are very complex. Standing up abruptly, the girl said that since the boy was so immersed in his worries, then they should get a little distracted together. And so, standing on the street and clutching a ball and a glove in his hands, Oliver asked his aunt what it was. To which Tiffany replied that it was a ball and a glove that had been collecting dust in the boy's toy box for a long time. She showed that the glove should be put on the left hand, which Oliver repeated. After which the girl loudly announced that they would now play a game called Catch the Ball, and Oliver just looked at his aunt's actions with a surprised look. Where Tiffany noted that this is not surprising, since this child's entire childhood was spent not playing, but trying to get food for himself. And in her free time, Elizabeth never played with Oliver. Then Tiffany explained the rules to him, saying that the ball must be caught with a gloved hand and thrown back. Oliver asked if his aunt knew exactly how to play this game, to which the girl said with a smile that she definitely knew better than the boy. And so the game began, with Oliver taking his first shot. Without much difficulty, Tiffany, who had been a baseball fan in her previous life, accepted the pitch. Saying that in reality the game is not so simple, the girl threw the ball back, not with a direct serve, but from the bottom up. The boy accepted such a serve with difficulty, asking aloud the question of how his aunt knows how to play so well. To which Tiffany, lifting her nose, replied that these were just flowers. Continuing to throw the ball, the girl tirelessly repeated that the best way to clear your head of annoying thoughts is physical activity. To which the boy quietly grumbled under his breath that if his aunt cleared her head, she would forget his instructions not to meet with Daniel. And when the girl asked what he just said, Oliver replied that it was nothing. Once again, throwing the ball to the child, Tiffany praised him for grasping everything on the fly. Then Oliver asked why her aunt always throws the ball from the bottom up, because it's more convenient to throw it straight, to which the girl immediately replied that it was out of habit. But after a couple of seconds, she answered that this type of throw is best played with beginners, since there is no acceleration or strength in the throw, and the clothes are not very suitable. Tiffany was already very interested in talking about throwing and the game, and even suggested trying to use a bat next time when Thomas approached her from behind. His words that Elizabeth and Oliver were having a lot of fun here made Tiffany flinch and turn around. Saying that he also wanted to try to play, the colonel asked permission to join. Not quite understanding the man's request, the girl asked if she understood correctly that he wanted to join her. And she immediately noted that the colonel probably lacked the determination to get closer to Oliver because of his coldness. And she decided to try to let them be together, inviting Thomas to play with Oliver. But at that very moment, the boy, making a very pitiful face, said that he was already very tired. Then he went up to Thomas and handed him the accessories for the game. Oliver himself stepped aside towards the trees and sat down on the ground. Tiffany was very surprised, deciding that she should go out with him to games more often, since he seemed very weak. Thomas, meanwhile, had already put the glove on his hand and got ready for the game. Having accepted the fact that she would have to play with Thomas, Tiffany happily said that she would quit first. Now the girl no longer stood on ceremony, and swinging properly completed the serve. But the colonel, as expected, caught the ball quite easily. As he made his pitch, Thomas said he understood the concept of the game, which he found quite fun. And to Tiffany's question, the man said that he was playing for the first time, which the girl doubted because of his good playing skills. After which she asked what the man was playing with his brother, to which instead of answering the question about why it was necessary to play with his brother, which completely discouraged the girl. But, after thinking a little, Tiffany felt sorry for this man, who, as it turned out, did not know at all what real childhood was. Apparently, all he did was constantly study something on the estate. That is why he grew up to be such a cold person, with whom it is often so difficult to communicate. Immediately, the girl was struck by the thought that if she did not pay due attention to Oliver, then he would grow into a second Thomas. Thinking that Thomas, of course, has his own charm, but she will not allow Oliver to become like that, Tiffany made another serve with all her might, where the man barely managed to put his hand up to catch the ball. Looking first at the ball in her hand and then at the girl, the colonel concluded that Elizabeth was indeed a very good thrower, and now he is convinced that the situation on the train with the killer and the pepper shaker was not accidental. To which Tiffany received a very violent reaction, that there was nothing special there and it was not worth remembering. Looking sideways at Oliver, the girl thought that there was no need for him to know that she had killed a man and hoped that he had not heard anything. But the boy still heard the conversation and was quick to ask what his relatives were talking about. And Tiffany, without answering any of the boy's questions, quickly began to push Thomas in the direction of the estate, saying that that's enough for today and it's time to rest. After some time, Tiffany was invited to the Duchess, where the girl sadly noted that Evelyn had been unwell since the reception, and she found herself literally bedridden. Tiffany asked how the Duchess was feeling, to which she immediately replied that everything was fine and Elizabeth should not worry too much. And Evelyn's apologies for calling Elizabeth to her place greatly embarrassed the girl. The Duchess did not torment Tiffany with guesses and immediately said that she called her to tell her that it was time for Elizabeth and Oliver to prepare for their trip to the capital. And Tiffany noted that another turning point in this story is coming. And Evelyn continued, saying that the boy needed to be introduced to the royal family, since he had royal blood flowing in him, and she had already sent a preliminary letter. And literally today, she finally received an answer from the capital. And since Elizabeth is heading to the capital for the first time, her son Thomas will accompany her and Oliver. Before the girl had time to conclude that only the three of them were traveling, the Duchess announced that she was supposed to go with them and introduce them to the royal family. Because it is customary among aristocrats that a much older woman represents a younger one. However, after these words, the Duke intervened in the conversation, saying that Evelyn could not go in her condition. The Duchess tried to object, but the Duke was very persistent, where Tiffany mentally supported the man's position. The girl tried to come from the other side, saying that given her age, it would be preferable for the Duchess to accompany a younger person. Tiffany then added that everyone would understand the situation and Thomas would go with her. But the Duchess objected, saying that for the status of their family, one accompanying man is not enough. There must be an accompanying woman. Where the main argument was that Elizabeth was going to the capital for the first time. And for this first visit, all formalities must be observed in order to avoid unnecessary rumors and problems in the future, which the girl could not but agree with. And finally, the Duchess admitted that, realizing her condition, she asked another person to provide the service of accompanying and introducing the royal family. This news was unexpected for Tiffany, and she immediately asked who it was. To which the Duchess immediately replied that she would become the younger sister of His Majesty and Princess Mary Jessica. This turn of affairs simply stunned Tiffany, who did not know how to react to this. And Evelyn added that such a decision was reasonable because Jessica was George's aunt. Realizing that this was too great an honor, Tiffany began to say that she was just a commoner and was not even George's official wife. To which the Duchess said that Jessica would not be accompanying the commoner, but accompanying the heir's mother, and besides, the princess was already aware of all the affairs. Listening to this, Tiffany came to the conclusion that if she went alone, there would be less commotion than if she were accompanied by a member of the royal family. Already sitting in her chambers, the girl understood that no matter what, she would have to be the center of attention. And then she remembered the events of the book, where at the moment when Elizabeth arrives in the capital, another character in this story will appear, Amelia Watson. She appeared in the midst of the ceremony and announced that her son was also George's child. Where, as proof, she showed everyone George's gift, which was a watch that once belonged to Princess Mary. Evelyn, who loved Princess Mary very much, of course took this watch to the Winter Forest along with her newly made relatives. Amelia and her son then proudly entered the dukedom as relatives of the Richardson family. However, in reality, her child had nothing to do with George, since he was the son of Daniel. But whatever it was, they never managed to take away Oliver's rightful place, because he was a copy of his father. This circumstance only became the reason that Amelia tried very hard to harm Oliver, but Thomas constantly defended him. At the same time, the cunning Amelia took advantage of her new position and regularly reported to Daniel about the situation in the Winter Forest, which led to many tragedies, including the death of Thomas. However, Elizabeth is now in the role of Oliver's mother, which should significantly change things. Therefore, Tiffany saw the purpose of her visit to the capital as the need to find and stop Amelia, so that in the future her actions would not lead to great tragedies. The girl's reasoning was interrupted by Laurie appearing in the chambers, where, literally running into the room, the young maid asked Elizabeth if it was true that she was going to go to the capital, to which Tiffany replied that rumors, as always, spread quickly and that it was true, and Laurie asked permission to accompany the mistress. To which Tiffany, of course, responded positively, which made the girl's eyes shine, and she enthusiastically said that she would finally ride the train for the first time. Tiffany asked Laurie to pack something in order not to die of boredom on the trip, which greatly surprised the maid, who considered the very fact of the trip to be one continuous adventure. Tiffany was greatly amused by the way the young maid talked about taking her on a trip, and she watched with emotion the sincere joy of this girl, for whom a train ride was an extraordinary event. Mentally, Tiffany was still immersed in her problems, gradually coming to the conclusion that she wouldn't change anything anyway. She needed to act. Deciding to get distracted, the girl asked the maid if she had cards and, after a positive answer, asked to take them with her. 2 months have passed since the announcement of the upcoming trip to the capital. All the personal luggage of the trip participants had already been loaded, and Laurie, feeling a strong sense of joy, could not wait for the journey to begin. Tiffany, approaching the carriage, asked Oliver, who was accompanying her, if he had taken everything. To which the boy casually replied that it was not his concern to ensure that everything was collected. And the young maid was already joyfully shouting for the young master and mistress to quickly get into the carriage. Giving Laurie a kind look, Tiffany thanked her for her attention. Suddenly, a complete surprise for everyone was the appearance of the Duchess on the street. Tiffany approached her and started to say something. But then she realized that she didn't know what to say or how to properly say goodbye to Evelyn. But the situation was saved by the Duchess herself, who suddenly tenderly took the girl's hands, wishing Elizabeth to take care of herself and have a safe journey. Such an unexpectedly warm gesture from the Duchess touched Tiffany, who, confused, responded to the wishes with only a simple thank you. And at that moment, Thomas appeared from the carriage and shouted to Elizabeth that it was time to go. And while Tiffany and Oliver were moving towards the carriage, wishes for a good journey and a successful trip were addressed to them from all sides. As she began to climb into the carriage, Tiffany suddenly stopped on the first step and turned around. Looking around at the mourners, the girl concluded with tears in her eyes that after her rebirth, she spent the most time in the Winter Forest. But then everyone took their places, and the carriage took off, leaving behind the estate, which has become almost native to Tiffany. Looking at the landscapes passing outside the window, the girl felt as if she was leaving her home. Oliver, sitting next to her, also noticed his aunt's condition. Having asked if she was crying, the boy immediately received a rather sharp answer from Tiffany that she didn't even think about crying. At that same moment, Thomas also drew attention to the girl's behavior, asking if everything was okay with her, to which he was also gifted with a sharp answer that everything was fine. And so, after a very short period of time, the entire traveling company was already at the station, where, however, they stayed for a short time, quickly finding themselves inside the train. Looking out the window, Thomas said that the timing was very fortunate, since if the royal family had written later, then everything would have been worse. Which was not entirely clear to Tiffany, and she asked why the man thought that. To which the colonel explained that winter comes to the winter forest early and manifests itself severely, and if the letter had arrived a little later, the trip would have had to be postponed for a year. But then, thinking a little, Thomas said that they were unlikely to meet the elderly king, who was George's grandfather and Oliver's great-grandfather. When the girl asked whether the elderly king was still ruling, Thomas replied that the young king often consults with him. Tiffany was interested to know what the old king was like, and she asked the man the appropriate question. After thinking for a moment, Thomas said that, to be frank, the old king is capricious, picky, difficult to interest in anything, and he likes to shift the blame to someone else. The man completed his characterization of the old king's personality with the words gloomy and biased towards others, after which Tiffany formed the unequivocal opinion that she definitely would not want to meet him. And the man continued the shocking story about the king, saying that at one point all fragile objects and vases had to be removed from his office, because his anger and irritability regularly reached such a limit where literally everything was used. Thomas ended his story by saying that as winter approaches, the old king usually goes further south, and when they arrive in the capital, he should no longer be there. Tiffany could only hope that during this time nothing unexpected would happen and the old king would leave. However, deciding to play it safe, the girl asked Thomas what type of people the old king liked, and the colonel replied that the most famous example was Princess Mary, whom he treated with special awe since she reminded him of his late sister. And Tiffany immediately suggested that in this case he should also like Oliver, who is so similar to Mary's son. But Thomas dispelled this pleasant illusion, saying that the old king hated George. Even though they are all his children, the old king is somehow very cold towards Princess Jessica and the current king. Hearing the name of her future escort, Tiffany asked what this woman was like. To which Thomas replied that he didn't know her well, but he heard that she had a very good relationship with Mary. That's why she cared so much about George, therefore she should like Elizabeth. Tiffany thought that if you look at it objectively, the current Duchess simply stole Mary's place. And now, most likely, Princess Jessica should hate Evelyn and her son Thomas. Looking at her hand, Tiffany remembered the gentle touch that the Duchess gave her. And I thought that despite the possible hatred, Princess Jessica still agreed to help Evelyn. Behind these thoughts, the train carried Tiffany and her companions from the snowy lands of the Winter Forest Duchy. The journey to the capital took a whole week, which travelers somehow had to while away on the train. And the girl was simply going crazy from the boredom consuming her. Looking at Oliver, Tiffany asked herself why the boy looked like he was pondering a question of a universal scale. Turning to the boy, she asked if he was busy now, which was very unexpected for him. And Oliver, confused, asked what was the matter. And Tiffany cheerfully replied that since the boy was not busy with anything, she invited him to play, which was received by Oliver without much enthusiasm. But the persistent girl said that since her nephew did not offer her to have fun, then she should do it herself. Without any real interest, Oliver asked the girl what she was offering him to play, and immediately received the answer that everything had already been thought out in advance. After which Tiffany, with a slight movement, took out and showed Oliver a deck of cards. Still not showing much interest, the boy said that he was ready to play and asked to give him the deck. And as soon as the cards were in his hands, he immediately demonstrated his skills in handling the deck, which could only be characteristic of a professional dealer. And while he continued to shuffle the deck in the most sophisticated ways, the amazed Tiffany mentally wondered where the child learned all this. At one point, one of the cards suddenly flew out of the deck. Oliver picked it up and just looked at the image for a while, after which he showed Tiffany the card and said that his aunt is the Queen of Hearts, who bears the same name, Elizabeth. This comparison was surprising to the girl, and she asked what it meant. To which the boy explained that each card has its own name, to which the girl could only wonder where he got all this from. To which Oliver replied that he simply very often looked at how others played. Tiffany concluded that he picked up all this from the yard hooligans in their village, and that all this strongly reminded her of something. Then she turned her attention to Thomas, who was sitting to the side and not taking part in the conversation. And then, without any hesitation, the girl invited the man to join their game. To which Thomas replied that he only played a couple of times with his army friends and was not very good at it. But Tiffany immediately said that she herself last played cards about 10 years ago, after which the colonel, smiling, said that in that case he would accept the invitation and take part in the game. Sitting down at the table, the group began to decide what they would play first. To which Tiffany suggested playing a game where you need to draw the desired card from your opponent, which everyone agreed with. and Oliver began to deal. Oliver drew the card first, and Tiffany froze in anticipation. Having made his choice quite quickly, the boy drew a card and immediately said that he had won, where Tiffany was left to conclude that he was playing very well. The next card to draw was Thomas, who, as it turns out, really isn't very good at gambling, because he drew the wrong card and Tiffany was the winner, which she was very happy about. The Colonel could only look at his cards in confusion. Thomas stated his loss, and Oliver said without hesitation that Thomas was a very bad player. Watching the game, Tiffany first thought that Thomas was deliberately giving in to the game. But then I realized that the Colonel was really very bad at this game and immediately offered to play poker. And so the game began, where after the first game, Tiffany announced that she had made 2 pairs. Oliver said he had a straight flush. Well, the Colonel concluded with disappointment that he had nothing, and he lost again. The girl mentally concluded that the man was simply terrible at the game, and Oliver said out loud that with the change of game, the overall picture did not change. It was quite obvious that his comrades invited him to the game only because he was very rich. Tiffany decided that the Colonel certainly shouldn't have cared about winning at cards for the sake of a couple of coins. Consequently, cards for him were not so much entertainment, and even more so with a thirst for profit, but rather a reason to get out among people. Even putting aside his abilities, Thomas had a very specific attitude towards any games. Suddenly, the boy attracted everyone's attention by addressing his playmates. Tiffany and Thomas looked at Oliver with interest. And the boy said that since their game was too boring, he offered to increase interest by placing bets. Tiffany immediately jumped up, saying that there should be no gambling, to which the boy immediately objected, saying that any self-respecting gentleman should know how to place bets, where he explained that betting develops faith in luck, teaches you to clearly assess and analyze the situation. That is, it develops your personality. And pointing to Thomas, Oliver added that the presence of bets will not only increase interest in the game, but will also provoke this mister's desire to finally win. Having placed the first card on the table, Oliver offered as a bet the opportunity for the winner to ask any question he was interested in to another participant in the game. But if the person to whom the question is asked does not want to answer it, then he pays a ransom instead of answering. And when Tiffany asked what she should do since she had no money, Oliver said that then she would just have to answer the question, to which Tiffany reluctantly agreed, saying that in this case it was necessary to agree on the exclusion of tricky questions. And Oliver, laughing, asked what questions his aunt had in mind, to which he immediately received an answer that he himself should understand. And now the first game with a bet was ending, where Thomas and Tiffany revealed their cards, announcing their combinations. It was Oliver's turn to reveal his cards, which he did, saying that he had a winning combination. After which, pointing to Thomas, he said that he had a question for him, where he immediately, without any embarrassment, asked about what kind of girls a man likes. The Colonel asked the boy about the essence of the question, to which Oliver explained that he meant what an ideal girl should be like in Thomas's eyes. The puzzled man replied that he had never thought about it before, to which Oliver quickly clarified that this does not answer the question, and therefore the man must pay. The Colonel did not object at all and immediately settled accounts with the boy in front of Tiffany, who was beginning to not really like all this. And so the next game was left behind, where once again Oliver won. And now a new question was asked to Thomas, where this time he had to say whether he liked someone at the present time. Tiffany concentrated all her attention because she really liked this man, and she was most interested in hearing what he would answer. Very embarrassed, Thomas asked if he was obliged to answer this question, to which Oliver replied that without any doubt, and the Colonel thought deeply. But after a few seconds of reflection, the man, instead of answering, simply handed the boy another payment. Tiffany was surprised by Thomas's reaction, suggesting that this was an indicator that he definitely liked someone. This was dizzying news for her, since the presence of a girl in a man's heart could change a lot. She immediately began to speculate as to why the Colonel was not getting married now, which could be because of a lost first love, love for a married girl, or unrequited love. Behind these thoughts, Tiffany did not notice how Oliver attracted her attention to the cards, asking him what happened. To which the boy replied that the next game was over, he won again, and now it was his aunt's turn to answer his question. Tiffany was horrified by the realization that she had not only missed the whole game, but that she had managed to lose. Scolding herself for being too immersed in her thoughts, the girl began to speculate about the upcoming question, which obviously would concern her feelings and relationships. Tiffany understood that she had no money, and she would have to answer the question where she would say that her heart belonged to the man sitting opposite. It immediately became noticeable from Thomas that he had gathered himself and was ready to listen to the girl's answer. The girl did not know what to do with herself because of the rage growing inside her, which was generated by a feeling of hopelessness. And so Oliver began to speak, for now simply turning to her aunt, which made the girl tense even more. The question plunged the girl into complete confusion, because Oliver asked whether his aunt would object if he suddenly decided not to accept the inheritance, where a surprised look towards the boy was directed not only from Tiffany, but also from Thomas. Trying to somehow digest what was said, Tiffany at the same time began to reflect on the fact that she could not even think about such an outcome of this story. And Oliver continued, reminding his aunt how she wanted to eat deliciously and wear expensive jewelry and clothes, which they would not have if he did not become Duke of Winterwood. The girl did not take her surprised gaze off the child, and a whole hurricane of thoughts was now spinning in her head. Among other things, Tiffany thought that the boy initially started this excitement just to ask this question. And only now she began to fully realize what a great responsibility falls on the fragile shoulders of a 10-year-old child. Under Oliver's circumstances, even an adult would be confused, let alone a child. Tiffany began to reproach herself for paying little attention to the boy, began to take more care of herself, and therefore did not notice that he could be stressed. She realized that all this time Oliver simply felt uneasy. That's why he behaved this way. And she, his aunt, was never able to understand the true reasons for this. Tiffany thought that she could have talked to the boy earlier and explained that he could refuse the inheritance altogether. And so, having pushed a huge amount of information through her head in a few seconds, Tiffany began to answer the question. She told the boy that she came with him to the winter forest not because she was looking for benefits, but only to take care of him. And if he does not want to inherit the dukedom, then they can return to their home village right now. They have arms, they have legs, they have a head and an inquisitive mind, and therefore she is sure that they will not have to starve. Judging by the boy's look, the words his aunt said touched him very much. And Tiffany added that even if the boy inherits the winter forest, she still does not plan to stay. But this remark was not appreciated by her companions, who were unanimously indignant at such plans. But the girl did not stop, saying that when Oliver becomes a duke, he will already be an adult, and he will not need his aunt's help. However, judging by the appearance of the boy and the man, they were no longer listening to what she was saying, but were each immersed in their own thoughts. Where Oliver thought that he would, of course, not leave her just like that, no matter what his aunt thought of. And Thomas came to the conclusion that he could not have expected such a turn of events. Tiffany was tired of this game of silence, and she invited the men to say something, to which both replied that they had nothing to say. Then the girl stood up and, saying that all the questions had been asked, suggested ending the game there. And as soon as she tried to remove the cards from the table, her movement was interrupted by someone's hand. It was the hand of the colonel, who said that it was not time to end the game. Tiffany guessed out loud that the man liked the game and asked if he wanted to continue playing, to which Thomas replied that the game itself was quite monotonous, but he liked playing with Elizabeth. The girl was pleasantly surprised by these words, but she immediately realized what was happening and assumed that the colonel apparently also wanted to ask a question. To which Thomas answered openly that he really had a question for the girl. Delighted, Tiffany easily agreed to play again and began to deal the cards. And so the game began again, with a new intensity of passions. But the result did not change at all. As always, Oliver became the winner and Thomas took last place. Looking disinterestedly at one of the cards in his winning hand, Oliver said he had no more questions. And he immediately added that Thomas could simply pay him right away, which made his aunt very nervous and try to pacify his ardor. However, the man said that everything was fine and the girl should not worry. After all, if there is passion, the game will go faster and more interesting. But the next game was over, where Thomas threw his next losing combination onto the table. The man immediately announced that he wanted to play more. And then another game took place, not in his favor, where the next coins were transferred to Oliver's disposal. And the persistent colonel immediately demanded a new batch. Tiffany did not understand anything, and she could only wonder where this man got such a craving for the game. But then, the new game ended, and Oliver, showing one of his cards that was part of the winning combination, hinted with the movement of his other hand that it was time to settle. Where at the same moment, a couple of coins were again at his complete disposal. And the restless Thomas demanded to start a new game. This overly persistent attitude of the colonel was already beginning to greatly frighten the girl. But at the same time, the girl turned her attention to Oliver, next to which an impressive amount had already formed, which made Tiffany remember that as a child her mother took all the money from her and gave it out in parts. The main thing here was that Oliver correctly understood her actions and did not perceive her as an attempt to enrich herself at his expense. And while she was thinking about all this, the game took place, and the colonel again paid for his loss. All this, according to Tiffany, was already beginning to get out of control, where she considered it completely unacceptable to spend such amounts on playing with a child. She looked at the boy, who was sorting through an impressive handful of coins, and did not know how to approach the question of how to stop all this. Oliver suddenly said that he was grateful to his uncle for the money. Tiffany was horrified by this address being said in such a way, since in the original story the boy called Thomas uncle constantly and with respect. But how much has everything changed now, where Oliver chose the word Mr. as the main address for Thomas? The girl was looking forward to the moment when the child would call Thomas uncle, and never expected that this would happen under such circumstances. And so, when Thomas once again settled with his nephew, the girl's patience came to an end, where she hit the table hard, stood up, and said that this must be stopped. To which Oliver immediately replied that it didn't matter to him since he had already made good money. Thomas tried to object, but Tiffany abruptly stopped him, saying that he was a grown man and should be the first to understand everything. And then she, with a good-natured face, invited the man to simply ask his question, where Oliver immediately began to angrily ask the man if he even understood the reason why the boy was constantly winning against him. This question, clearly asked with passion, attracted Tiffany's attention, and she asked Oliver why he always wins, where the boy immediately lowered his head and fell silent. Thomas responded to the girl's proposal that he, of course, was grateful for her kindness, but he would not take advantage of such an indulgence since it was not fair. Instead, the colonel suggested playing some more, to which Tiffany said that gambling addiction could not be cured later. And then she began to tell that their family already had such a negative experience, where Oliver's grandfather, her father, lost their entire fortune. And after he lost everything, her father got very drunk, fell off a bridge, and died. After listening to this heartbreaking story, Thomas said that he understood the girl's feelings and concerns, and therefore agreed to stop the game. During the game, time flew by quite quickly, and outside the window of the train rushing towards the capital, it had long since become dark. Oliver went to bed and quickly fell into a deep sleep. Looking at how the boy slept, Tiffany thought that in this state, he reminded her of a little angel. The question of why the girl was not sleeping yet attracted Tiffany's attention. Turning around, Tiffany saw the colonel approaching her, who had already changed his clothes. She said she was just admiring the boy sleeping, where Thomas agreed that children are very cute when they sleep. Suddenly, the girl apologized for everything that happened today, which caused the colonel a feeling of bewilderment and a corresponding question to Elizabeth about what she was apologizing for. And the girl explained that she found Oliver's behavior today not the best, where Thomas must have been very uncomfortable with his actions and words. To which the man said that there was nothing to worry about, since he perceived everything correctly, and besides, he communicates with Elizabeth in the same way. And the colonel's words that he was glad that the boy took him as close as Elizabeth confused Tiffany, who understood that Oliver did not really trust her. Here the man interrupted her train of thought, asking if the girl was tired from such long trips. To which Tiffany replied that just sitting still during the trip does not cause fatigue. Immediately, a picture of today spent playing cards appeared before her eyes, and Tiffany, experiencing the most pleasant feelings, said that traveling in good company is much more fun. To which Thomas, of course, agreed, having made some more conclusions for himself, which he did not voice. Then the conversation continued on other topics, where Tiffany asked how long it would take them to get to the capital, and Thomas replied that it was about 3 days. And he immediately added that if the girl was bored, then they could play poker tomorrow, but that he immediately received an objection in response, where Tiffany said that he should become an example for the boy. And now 3 days of travel were left behind, where the train finally arrived at the capital station. The travelers left the carriage and the station quite quickly. And a few minutes after the train stopped, the capital of the kingdom appeared in all its glory before Tiffany's eyes. The carriages had already been delivered, and the trio, already very tired from the long journey, continued on their way. Inside the carriage, Tiffany looked at Oliver and Thomas with emotion, noting their strong similarities not only in characters and behavior, but also in the manner of movements and poses. Thomas, who noticed the girl's close attention, immediately asked her what happened, to which Tiffany quickly replied that everything was fine. This part of the journey was not very long, and very soon the travelers were already leaving the carriage, where they arrived in the suburban part of the capital, where there was a mansion owned by the Richardson family. On the street they were met with the most good-natured air by the butler, who introduced himself as Martin and placed himself at the disposal of the gentleman. And while the girl was trying to figure out how the butler from the duchy's estate managed to get here before them, Thomas carefully explained that this was his twin brother, and only then did Tiffany pay attention to the difference in the names Martin and Marvin. And only now did Tiffany notice that from the moment they left the carriage, Thomas continued to hold her hand. She looked questioningly and sweetly at the man, thinking that he had again misunderstood something or was doing the wrong thing. She quietly tried to pull her hand out of the colonel's hand, but she failed, since the man was holding his hand tightly. But at that moment, Oliver, leaning out of the carriage, told them to start moving somewhere, giving him the opportunity to get out, and at the same time noted how tenderly the man was holding his aunt. Then Thomas had to let go of the girl's hand, where she offered to help the boy leave the carriage, which he, of course, refused. And then, looking at Thomas asking the servants if the rooms were ready, Tiffany once again thought about the reasons why Oliver was not very good-natured with the colonel. Marvin replied that everything was ready exactly as Thomas had asked, and the colonel additionally asked what room had been prepared for Elizabeth. To which the butler announced that a special room was being prepared for her. And Tiffany immediately inquired about whose chambers had been prepared for her stay in the mansion. But the question remained unanswered, where Thomas said in a mysterious tone that Elizabeth would know about it later. Just a minute later, the doors to the mansion opened, and Tiffany was able to marvel at the splendor of its interior decoration. And when she went into her room, she said that this room seemed to be created for a princess, where Thomas immediately said that the girl's conclusions were absolutely correct. after which the colonel added that these were the chambers of Princess Mary, which greatly surprised the girl. Thomas said that since the death of the princess, there had been no one in these chambers, and the Duchess personally ordered that this room be monitored. He also said that many of the girls that George brought here wanted to get these chambers, but this was impermissible. After hearing this, Tiffany expressed her doubts about living in this room, saying that in this case she should look for other rooms. To which Thomas immediately said that this was his mother's will, since without it, the butler would not even have let them in here. Tiffany was very pleased with the Duchess's attitude towards her, but then she thought that she would have to be extremely careful and even refuse to drink tea in the room, so as not to accidentally spoil something here. As it turned out, life in the capital was not much different from life in the winter forest. The servants, who were worried about Oliver's habits, seeing in him the features of the deceased master, who was not distinguished by neatness, were pleasantly surprised by the calm disposition and cleanliness of the boy. Tiffany kept trying to somehow establish contact with Oliver, asking if everything was okay with him, how he slept, how he ate. To which the boy, without any enthusiasm in his voice, replied that his aunt should not worry about his affairs and should take care of her own, where the girl noted how difficult it is to raise a child. The sudden appearance of Laurie, who announced that the tea was ready in the midst of Tiffany's thought process, once again frightened the girl. Over tea, the young maid said that there were now many rumors about her mistress's stay in the princess's room, to which Tiffany responded with words of surprise. And to Laurie's question about whether the mistress had noticed strange looks on herself, Tiffany replied that she chalked it up to her usual friendly attitude, which made the young girl laugh a lot, saying that you can't find friendliness in the capital, all the people here are strict and biased. Tiffany said that her maid was very good at her duties and had already learned a lot. Previously, she had already noted how quickly and easily this girl found a common language with the rest of the servants and became one of them. And while Laurie said that she already knew a couple of people and was collecting information, Tiffany noted that this young maid was simply incredible. When asked how Laurie was able to achieve such a position, the girl replied that she simply became useful, after which she voiced the main thing that she managed to find out where everyone in the house now thinks that her mistress will soon become the new lady of this mansion. Tiffany didn't know how to react to such information and simply remained silent, trying to somehow digest what she heard. But finally, having come to her senses a little after what she had heard, Tiffany asked how this could even be possible and where such a rumor came from. And Laurie began to explain that the first and main evidence was that her mistress occupied the princess's room, which no one had been allowed to enter before, which takes place with the approval of the Duchess herself. And Laurie finished her explanation by saying that such news spread very quickly, and now all the servants treat the mistress's maid with special respect. And Tiffany asked why the room is so famous. After thinking a little, the young maid said that these rumors most likely came from those girls whom Mr. George took here. Taking a sip of tea, Tiffany thought about the fact that her stay in this room might not be easy to organize. And in fact, it would be better to leave this place as soon as possible. She then turned to Laurie and asked her to invite Marvin to her. The lady's request was fulfilled quickly, and a few minutes later, the butler was already asking Elizabeth how he could help her. Apologizing for distracting the man from other important matters, Tiffany said that she wanted to know something, where her question about whether there was a report in the mansion that was sent to the duchy greatly surprised Marvin, who asked if he had heard everything correctly. To which Tiffany said that she knew about the mansion's monthly reports for the duchy, where a copy was sent there, and the original was kept here in the mansion. Adjusting his pince-nez, Marvin said that this is indeed true, but he doesn't understand why Elizabeth needs all this information. And Tiffany explained that she wanted to check something, for which she needed reports from 10 years ago. And she found out about their existence quite by accident, when she was wandering around the library in search of something to read, stumbling upon strange papers on one of the shelves. Having printed them out, the girl discovered that there was information about all the visitors to the mansion in the capital. And when George grew older, he began to spend more time in the mansion, and therefore the reports began to be monitored more carefully. Tiffany had a pretty good plan in her head. Amelia's illegitimate child was the same age as Oliver, which meant it was a lie that he was a descendant of George. And if Tiffany could find records of where George was about 10 years ago, then this lie could be exposed. However, the Richardson estate only had reports for the last 5 years. Tiffany then thought about asking the Duchess about the original reports, but abandoned this idea, since Evelyn might not approve of the girl delving into the past of George, whom she loved so much. Where even then Tiffany had the idea that it would be nice to be in the mansion and look for the reports herself. And now she was in the place she needed, where Marvin was already asking what exactly interests the lady in these reports, where he said that the reports do not actually cover all aspects of life in the mansion. But the girl immediately interrupted his speech, saying that she was looking for information about George, from whom she had a son. This explanation was not at all suspicious, since it was obvious that she could be interested in the life of the man with whom she was close, and Tiffany asked to be given the opportunity to look at the documents she needed. To which Marvin first said that this was confidential information, but since Elizabeth was also a family member and moreover the Duchess herself had expressed confidence in her, he would provide the documents. The girl was very happy that everything worked out so easily for her and that she would be able to get the information she needed. However, the butler clarified that there were a lot of documents and Miss could use some help, to which Tiffany immediately replied that she dealt with everything herself. After which she turned to Marvin with another request, where she reported the need to track the movements of one person, where the butler, without asking unnecessary questions, only inquired about who was in question. And the girl was not slow to say the name Amelia, where, after thinking a little and remembering the necessary information, she added information about the surname Watson. Marvin said that he had never heard of such a surname, and Tiffany explained that she might be from a noble family, but she was kicked out after giving birth to an illegitimate child. However, the butler said that with such scant information about the girl's identity, it would not be easy to find her. Then Tiffany said that she was sure that his father was helping the child financially, which immediately changed the situation, and Marvin said that he would prepare everything before the mistress returned. The girl could not help but be pleased with this state of affairs, and she heartily thanked the butler. Showing his courtesy, the man asked if the lady had any other requests, to which Tiffany, after thinking a little, replied that she would prefer that Thomas knew nothing about all this. To which Marvin replied that he would not specifically talk about this, but if the colonel asks, he will not lie. This option suited the girl quite well, because after all, he was the butler of the Richardson family and not her personal servant. Having received all the orders, Marvin took his leave and left the room. Sinking into a chair, the girl once again ran through her thoughts all that she needed to do in order to expose Amelia's lies. And once again convinced of the correctness of her train of thought, Tiffany concluded that Amelia had fallen into her own trap with her lies. The next day, the girl was prepared to meet the one who would represent her at the royal banquet. Thomas immediately appeared and said that he would accompany the girl to the palace. Tiffin tried to say that she did not need a man to accompany her, but the colonel said that in any case he needed to see his majesty, and therefore the girl did not need to resist his company. Where he added that if only he could, he would have been present at Elizabeth's meeting with Princess Jessica, which amazed the girl, because this man, it turns out, could go far if he wanted. After listening to Thomas, Tiffany said that he should not worry. She would only say hello to the princess, which would not take much time. However, the girl mentally noted that she would not mind at all if the colonel were nearby, since next to him she feels much more confident. Already going down the stairs, Tiffany noted to herself that she herself had not noticed how accustomed she was to this man's care. Oliver was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Tiffany was very happy with the boy, thanking him for coming to see them off. And while he was trying to tell his aunt not to do anything stupid when communicating with the princess, the girl had already begun to pat his cheeks, telling him what a good and sweet boy he was and that he should prepare to take the arithmetic test when his aunt returned. Oliver tried to say that he didn't need this test, to which he immediately received a whole lot of information about the benefits of studying and decided to simply agree with the girl's arguments. But after that, he once again told his aunt not to follow suspicious people and not to say anything unnecessary to the princess. And then Laurie intervened in the dialogue, saying that the young master can be calm since she will always be with her mistress and will help her if anything happens. After thinking a little, Oliver said that he relied on the maid. And he immediately added that he could trust her, which amazed Tiffany, who did not understand why the boy so easily trusted some unfamiliar maid, but did not trust his aunt. She tried to be indignant about the lack of confidence in her, but since they were already late, Laurie and Thomas hurried the girl. But even sitting inside the carriage, the girl was haunted by the thought that Oliver trusted some servant more than her, his own aunt. But the jealousy and anger raging inside the girl gave way to a feeling of sadness, and her thoughts turned to the question of what she should do to earn Oliver's trust. During these thoughts, Tiffany did not notice how the carriage ended up near the royal palace. Busy with various thoughts on the road, Tiffany did not feel a sense of excitement, but now the girl was even shaking a little. And so, stopping at one of the doors, Thomas suddenly said that he could not go further. The girl looked at the man with her frightened eyes, still not believing that now she would find herself without his support. Not for a moment did she remember that upon arrival in the winter forest, she was very worried, but next to him she was still much calmer. And so, having gathered her strength and thoughts, deciding that now everything would go well, as in the winter forest, Tiffany said that she would return soon. Then she opened the door and went into the princess's chambers. Princess Jessica greeted the guest sitting in a chair and holding a mug of tea. As required by etiquette, Tiffany greeted the princess, saying that she was very glad to meet her and introduced herself, giving her first and last name. However, the greeting remained without any response, where the princess only took a sip of tea, after which she put the mug on the table. Then, looking at Tiffany with a not very kind look, she said, turning to you, for the girl to sit down. While the girl was settling into the chair, she noted the obvious unfriendly tone of the royal person. And Jessica continued, saying that she was not at all happy, since it would have been nothing if Elizabeth had been George's mistress, but she spent only one night with him and is the most ordinary commoner. And then, clutching her head, the princess said that representing Elizabeth was a shame for her and she was only losing from it. Jessica immediately added that Evelyn had sent her a gift, asking her maid to bring it. Pointing to the jewelry, Jessica said that Evelyn gave her this necklace, and therefore she could not refuse the request to represent Elizabeth. Tiffany was amazed that the Duchess gave such an expensive item as a gift for her sake. And the princess continued to talk, where now she said that she intended to return the gift and find another person who would represent Elizabeth, but not from the royal family, but someone of lower status. Tiffany sadly noted that the Duchess's sincerity was not duly noted, but nevertheless, the princess at least tried to find someone to replace her and did not leave everything to chance. Thanking the princess for her generosity, Tiffany said that in this case she asked permission to leave the palace before dinner, but Jessica suddenly said that she had changed her mind. Thinking that she had misheard, Tiffany asked the princess what she had just said. Raising her voice slightly, Jessica said that she would introduce Elizabeth to the royal family. This was an unexpected statement, and the girl carefully asked the princess why she decided to change her mind, to which Jessica replied that it was difficult to explain, and the girl most likely would not believe that this was just her personal whim. Having given the order that the jewelry be returned to the Duchess, the princess, giving Tiffany a strange look, said that she understood why Evelyn asked for Elizabeth. And then it dawned on the girl that both of these women, the Duchess and the princess, saw the deceased Princess Mary in Elizabeth. Jessica suddenly asked if the Duchess treated her well, to which Tiffany immediately responded positively. And the princess noted that this is in the spirit of Evelyn, since only the two of them continue to honor the memory of Mary. Tiffany thought that, probably, the old king should also not forget his favorite. The girl looked intently at the princess sitting opposite her, and she noted to herself that she was probably mistaken in concluding that Jessica hated Evelyn, which could not be said about the rest of the Richardson family. And then the princess, in tune with Tiffany's thoughts, said that she would like to warn Elizabeth that she should not trust this family too much. At that same moment, the girl remembered Daniel's words that she shouldn't trust Thomas. After thinking a little, Tiffany decided and voiced that perhaps the princess was saying these words out of the same personal whim for which she decided to introduce her to the royal family. But suddenly, after what Tiffany said, Jessica signaled for everyone present to leave her chambers. Laurie, who promised to protect Mrs., rushed from side to side, not knowing what to do now. And Tiffany gave her a sign that everything was in order. The maid should not worry about her and leave the room. Thinking that she was leaving her mistress to her fate, the young girl left the princess's chambers. When the interlocutors were left alone, silence hung in the air for some time. The first to break this silence, as one would expect, was the princess, where she began to say that the day before Maria's marriage, she heard rumors that this wedding was arranged and the marriage should be dissolved after the birth of the child. The amazed girl asked whether it was really possible to dissolve such a marriage so easily, to which the princess replied that, of course not, since her father would be furious at such news since he values the status of the family very much. To which Tiffany expressed misunderstanding and added that there was also an agreement that the Richardson family would build a railway if they were connected with royal blood. And Jessica said that no one will ever know what exactly was discussed then, but she knows for sure that the possibility of building a railway was just a pretext. And then Tiffany began to think that it was impossible to imagine that the entire relationship between Evelyn and Maria was a lie. And then inspiration descended on the girl. She suddenly realized that from the very beginning the Duke loved not Mary, but Evelyn. And his wedding with Princess Mary was only an action aimed at getting Evelyn, where Mary was supposed to give birth to a child. Then, in any case, even with a divorce, the child would become the only representative of the royal family in the duchy and Evelyn would remain with him. After thinking about all this, Tiffany asked the princess what was the point of Mary returning to the palace after the divorce. To which the princess said that if everything had not gone so far, then everyone would have returned, both Maria and George and Evelyn. And then the girl realized that the Duke, in fact, was holding George hostage, and if Evelyn knew that he was simply using Maria, she would never have stayed with him. But there remained an unanswerable question, which Tiffany immediately asked the princess, where it was not clear what could make Princess Mary accept the Duke's proposal. To which Jessica said that this remains the biggest mystery that she is unable to resolve and hold the perpetrators accountable. Finishing with the conclusion that now Mary is no longer alive, and the truth will never be learned from the Duke. However, before she could finish one thought, Jessica immediately said that this is not the only reason why she advises Elizabeth not to trust this family. The princess asked the girl if she knew the cause of George's death, to which Tiffany replied that, according to the stories, he got drunk and fell off his horse. Hearing Tiffany's words, Jessica laughed and repeated the words, "fell off a horse." She laughed louder and louder, and her laughter was more and more terrible and frightened Tiffany greatly. But having finished laughing and with a terrible expression on her face, Jessica suddenly asked Elizabeth if she knew that George hated horse riding with all his being. The girl listened without saying a word as the princess talked about how her nephew was too proud to admit his fear of riding, and even Evelyn, who raised him, did not know about it. It was a huge lie that he carried throughout his life. each time avoiding riding on horseback under various pretexts. And so, having voiced all this, Jessica asked Elizabeth whether such a person would voluntarily sit on a horse. Stunned by these new details about George, Tiffany didn't know what to say in response. And Jessica, hitting the table hard with her fist, shouted that in this situation, everything was obvious, where George was simply killed, since the Duke had always disliked him. Where he and Evelyn had a child of their own, and he definitely wanted to make him the heir to the dukedom, not his half-brother. Covering her face with her hands, as if trying to prevent a scream from escaping, Tiffany thought with horror about how the Duke decided to kill his own son. The princess continued, saying that she was very surprised that the Duke decided to make Oliver heir, since if he planned to give the dukedom to Thomas, then it was very strange to accept George's son. Tiffany was suddenly seized with horror, where she thought that all this time Oliver had been in mortal danger. And Jessica said that maybe she, of course, had become too sensitive. But this child is a relative of her sister Maria, but not Evelyn. After which, she once again told Elizabeth that it was for all these reasons that she advised her to be extremely careful with this family. Tiffany, who had not yet had time to digest all this flood of information, said that she would take everything said into account. And the princess added that now she does not yet have evidence against the Richardson family, but soon they will definitely appear.